remember things that happened 80 years ago. How do you do that?
David, it's easier to remember 80 years ago than what I had for lunch today.
Mercedes-Benz is on a path towards CO2 neutral mobility. So we have flicked the switch there, and really we're going to step by step electrify everything. And what does that mean? Combustion engines get electrified.
Market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
Day two on Capitol Hill from New York City for our audience worldwide. Good morning, good morning. The countdown to the open starts right now with equity futures positive. Let's get straight to it. We begin with the big issue, the cyclical trade losing steam.
We have a little bit of a pause in this rotation.
It's been a significant 7 months that value stocks have recovered.
The cyclicals and the reopening levered names have ran, and they've ran extremely hard.
We've never seen those kinds of numbers.
Now as we're starting to take a pause.
It's value and growth.
If rates stabilize,
market sentiment can flip quite easily.
I wouldn't be the least surprised.
There's going to be a battle here.
Energy, financials, other value, cyclical plays.
The market is reassessing what's the right valuation for those names.
You're not going to have just a one-way trade.
That trade is going to take a little bit of a pause here.
That trade has taken a little bit of a pause here. Let's bring in the Bloomberg team. Katie Lyons, Taylor Riggs. Morning, Kaylee.
Good morning, John. Well, this rotation from growth into value and cyclical names had really defined 2021 up until this week. Granted, all of the major benchmarks are lower over the past 5 days, but when you take a look at where the relative outperformance has been, it is in large cap tech. NASDAQ 100 only down about 0.7% when you're looking at futures. The large cap S&P 500 only down by about 1.25 as well. But the small cap Russell 2000 is down by more like 6% at this point. And yesterday, of course, it had its worst day of underperformance relative to the S&P 500 in a year, as that cyclical trade, as we just heard, really is losing steam, or at least taking a bit of a pause. When you look at the way that this has played out on a sector basis, year to date, energy is up more than 26%, financials by 12%. They are still at the top of the pile in terms of group performance within the S&P this year, but in the last week, it is a different picture. Energy dropping 6%, financials by around 3%, the two worst performing sectors in the index. Meanwhile, the worst two performing sectors on the year, utilities and staples, both bond proxies, are the best performing over the last 5 days. The question now, John, is really whether this is just a temporary breather and that furious value rotation is going to continue, because it has been, as I alluded to, outperforming on the year. The S&P 500 value index is up about 8%. Its growth peer is only up by about 1%, bringing that ratio of value to growth up off the lowest levels on record, staging what looked like the start of a long road to a comeback, but clearly some of those gains being given back this week, John.
Katie Lyons, thank you. It begins and ends with the bond market. Some stability, Taylor Riggs, for Treasuries.
John, you know, with real yield, the equity guys are just following what the smart bond guys are doing. So let's take a look at the 10-year yield, which has fallen from a 175 back down to a 163. And so yields lower has meant that has been fueling part of the rotation back into tech, part out of that reflationary trade. But this is a cross-asset story. You've seen some of the risk-off jitter show up as gold is higher, Bloomberg Dollar Index higher in the last week. Some concerns around the economic growth picture, particularly, again, in your Germany, where there's confusion on if we're opening up or not, means copper is down. Bloomberg Commodity Index has all been lower in the last week. That's part of the economic picture that's driving the backing away from that reflationary trade. Interestingly enough, I was asking a guest about this earlier yesterday. Relatively, bond market vol is higher than equity vol. Is equity vol higher because bond market volatility is higher? I'm not smart enough to know the answer to that. But if bond vol on a relative basis is higher, that is something markets are concerned about.
Taylor, it's a really important observation. Looking forward to the coverage a little bit later today. Taylor mentioning Germany. Let's just sit on those headlines from Chancellor Merkel out in the last hour, which I find absolutely phenomenal. Backing down from an Easter lockdown, the Chancellor of Germany saying she made a mistake and asking forgiveness from German citizens. And that's the story that's playing out in Germany, in Europe right now, grappling with a reopening and a vaccination process across the continent. Not the same story here in the United States, where we've been piling into the cyclical trade since the end of October to start of November, underpinned and reinforced by increased optimism and enthusiasm about the recovery that's still to come in America. Nuvin's Brian Nix saying he's looking past the cyclical trade and writing the following: don't sleep on US growth. Rotations into cyclical value can be violent and even durable, but a pause in the rising rate cycle combined with a few more very good earnings seasons are going to give support to tech stocks. Brian joins us right now for more. So Brian, just go through it a little bit more explicitly for me. Are you saying now's the time to buy back into tech?
Well, we never get out of tech, and I think what we're trying to say there is that it shouldn't just be one side of the market that people are thinking about at any given time, because the shifts between growth and value, cyclical and defensive, have been so violent over the last really year and are continuing to be so, that I think we have to be prepared for a year in which a lot of different areas of the market perform well, and that at any given time there's going to be some that are in favor versus not in favor. Right now, with I think some concerns about the lack of the vaccination progress in Europe, with a little bit of a backup in rates or fall in rates on the back of the Fed meeting last week, more dovishness from the Fed tends to be good for tech stocks. That, you know, right now that seems to be the place the market wants to be. But looking forward, I think as long as we continue to exceed expectations on the economic front, which I think we will, the cyclical trade is still going to have legs.
It's going to act quickly. This market's going to move quickly. And Brian, a little bit later in this program, I'll be talking to Morgan Stanley, and they came out a couple of weeks ago and downgraded small caps just on time. And it's their cycle work that is helping them here. They think we've seen the early cycle trade. It's almost complete, move to mid-cycle. What do you think about that story at the moment, Brian? Where do you think we are in this cycle, in this market?
I'm not even sure we can think about it in those kind of traditional terms, because what we saw last year wasn't a typical recession, and we haven't had a typical recovery. So we may be marching back into some kind of mid to late cycle mode. Certainly, if you look at the credit markets, that's where we are in terms of spreads here in the U.S. But I think the fact that small cap underperformed by so much last year, and that it should be a huge part of the earnings recovery this year, means we still think that trade has legs, especially if you're looking at financials. The energy names are very levered in the small cap space to the price of oil, and that's what's creating the volatility lately. If we don't think oil is going much higher, that part of the trade may not be there for you over the balance of the year. But I think certainly if you're looking at consumer names, financials, that part of the small cap market should be solid moving forward. And that's where we kind of want to narrow our focus as we're moving into the second quarter.
Brian, typically if I ask the question, what do you think is in the driving seat right now, which asset class, they might say the bond market. Do you think it has been energy in a way that perhaps has been underestimated over the last few months?
I think if you're looking at what parts of the equity market globally are doing well, it's highly leveraged to energy. But energy, I think it's its own dependent variable. And what's causing the oil prices to shoot up is this expectation that demand is going to come roaring back at some point this year, and maybe already has in some parts of the world. The gasoline prices in the U.S., which are obviously going to be dependent on to some extent on crude oil, are also at a very high level for this point in the year. And traditionally, we've seen them even go higher as we head into the summer months. So that's something we have to keep an eye on, both from a macro perspective, but also from a market perspective. Just how is that going to potentially crowd out other sources of consumer demand? How could it potentially add to the bottom line for energy companies? I think the trade here in the equity market has been financials and energy versus utilities and tech, and it's sort of become defensive growth against cyclical value. And it almost feels like a coin toss when you wake up each day, which one's going to be ahead.
And many people are just staying barbelled, Brian. They're just staying with both stories. Tech on the one side, growth on the one side, secular growth themes, cyclical stories on the other side, higher rate stories, energy, etc., banks, etc. Brian, let me ask this of you. I've asked repeatedly through the morning, not asked the when question. When do you think we're fully valued? When do you think this rotation is complete? I want to understand with a little bit more detail what would inform that decision, the signposts you would look for on the road towards that move being complete. What would you look for, Brian?
I would look for a meaningful tightening in financial conditions, which typically would come with more of a rotation out of cyclical value and into defensive growth. We saw that happen really in 2013, 2014 here in the U.S. I don't think we're going to get that for quite a while if you believe everything the Fed has been saying. I completely agree with your barbell comment. Rather than trying to kind of get in and out in these kind of rapid fashion trades and try to guess what kind of trade is going to be in vogue in any given week or month, just holding a lot of everything. And maybe the barbell is the best approach. But in a year in which earnings growth in the U.S. is going to be 25 or 30%, chances are most sectors are going to do quite well, and it will go through phases as the year goes on. But I don't expect financial conditions to be meaningfully tighter at the end of this year than at the beginning. So I'd still look for that cyclical trade, whether it's small caps, maybe it's Europe, maybe it's parts of emerging markets. I think that all those trades can continue to do well.
We can touch on Europe a little bit later. Small cap outperformance this morning. The Russell up by 0.9%. Brian, stay close, won't you? We'll bring you back into the conversation in just a moment. I want to turn now to the equity market. We do roll over on the Nasdaq, up by about 0.5%. Still positive on the Nasdaq 100 by 65 points. With your movers at the market desk, here's Kriti Gupta.
Well, good morning, John. The big story here is in the chip space, and the big story with that is Intel. You saw the CEO announce a bold new manufacturing plan just yesterday, and that's really in competition now with TSMC, which of course announced their own build-out plans just recently. So you are seeing some of Intel and some of those chip equipment makers really rally right now, of course, at the expense of TSMC. I do also want to look at some of those more volatile names, though. Let's take a look at Tesla or Bitcoin. You really did see Elon Musk come out and say that they are now accepting crypto payments. So that, of course, giving a boost not only to Tesla, but to those crypto stocks as well, in line with that Bitcoin rally, and of course, helping those EV makers as well, John.
Kriti, thank you. Much more from Kriti going into the opening bell and coming out the other side. Coming up, Chairman Powell and Secretary Yellen gearing up for day 2 on Capitol Hill with the inflation debate heating up. That conversation up next with Nuveen's Brian Nick and Katie Kaminsky of Alpha Simplex. From New York City this morning, good morning. Futures positive, the bond market stable. This is Bloomberg.
Trading revenues coming in better than expected. Everything cash, $1.4 trillion of cash. One of the most notable aspects of this report that was stellar.
I'm David Weston. Bloomberg Television is reinventing one of the most iconic brands in financial television for a new audience. Join me to see the news program for the clever investor. This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week.
There continues to be a great deal of speculation that we should be worried about inflationary pressures, particularly after the passage of the most recent $1.9 trillion spending bill. And then we see recent press reports of an additional $3 trillion of spending contemplated by this administration. Does the Fed share that there are inflationary pressures and concerns with this rate of spending?
The inflation debate heating up in Washington, D.C. Republicans voicing their concerns about price pressure. Chairman Powell sticking to script and pushing back.
Our best view is that the effect on inflation will be neither particularly large nor persistent. And part of that just is that we've been living in a world of strong disinflationary pressures around the world, really, for a quarter of a century. And we don't think that a one-time surge in spending leading to temporary price increases would disrupt that. However, we have the tools to deal with that.
Expect to hear that, or some form of that, on repeat again today. Michael McKee joins us for more. Morning, Mike.
Morning, John. There isn't going to be an answer to this question until we get maybe a year from now and see how far inflation went and how fast it went up. Because even Jay Powell, as you heard, thinks that inflation is going to rise. The question is, does it stick around? And there are several different arguments on both sides of the issue. First of all that spending that's coming down the pike from the government rescue programs, it has increased Americans' incomes tremendously. You can see the white line there way, way up. But wages and salaries, they're flat. The blue line, they're not going anywhere. And until that happens, the Fed's going to think it's temporary because we're not going to see a wage price spiral. There are going to be temporary factors. We've talked about the big one, the month-over-month numbers from the decline that we saw. But look at these two things here. We see chip prices and oil prices both going up recently. The computer chip situation, not very good because it's leading to production shutdowns for American automakers, and that means that car prices will probably go up. So those things will feed in, but eventually we assume we will get more computer chips in inventory. And finally, you look at the globalization issue, and that's the heart of the Fed's comments here. The Fed thinks that because of globalization, we've seen a change in inflation dynamics. This is the OECD's measure of CPI worldwide, and you can see over the last 40 years how it's done nothing but trend lower. As long as there are markets that have slack in them, there's going to be slack in the United States because we can look for product manufacturing or we can look for workers overseas. John?
Mike McKee, this debate's going nowhere, is it? It really is not. And Mike, it's going to get worse in the next couple of months because, Mike, the base effects kick in.
The base effects kick in starting with this month. So sometime in April, we're going to get the CPI numbers, and that'll probably scare the markets. We'll see if they've absorbed the lesson that it's coming.
Michael McKee, thank you, sir. Let's bring in the panel. Katie Kaminsky of Alpha Simplex, Nuveen's Brian Nick still with us. Katie, great to get you back on the show. Let's just start there. I've had this conversation a few times now, and what I find absolutely remarkable is we all expect this data because this data is highly predictable. For inflation, the base effects will kick in this month, next month, and beyond. Yet there's still this curious sort of nature of the approach to try and understand how market participants will respond to it. How do you think market participants will respond to it when they actually see it?
I think they're going to be very concerned, and they're already concerned, so that tells you. And I think if you put yourself in the perspective of the Fed, there's really no reason to spook the markets ahead of those numbers coming out. And that's why they keep coming out and saying everything's going to be fine. I think some of us who spend more time in the commodity markets, who've ridden the wave that we had this last year, have kind of said, wow, if this doesn't slow down at some point, this is a little bit frightening. And we also know that CPI numbers, they lag. They often take time for that type of price increases to push down the line. I think the best parallel is the euro transition. We saw sort of a transitory inflation pop from that. The question is that transitory, or do we start seeing confirmation that that's not a transitory change?
Do you think it is transitory?
I actually think it may be something that's prolonged. I don't think it's going to be something extreme, but I do think that we're seeing numbers and changes in terms of the amount of spending that is not something we've seen before in recent history. So it's not easy to extrapolate. And just using the pure numbers and what's going to be spent on infrastructure, what's going to be spent on housing markets, just gives me some pause that we might see some more inflation than we're used to since the 70s.
Brian, the lesson of the last 12 months is be humble. I'm trying to be as humble about this as I possibly can be. So I'll ask the question to you and just try and get your best guess. Do you think these forces do persist?
I think for sure we're going to see higher year-on-year inflation in just a couple of weeks, if not a few months. We actually have our second quarter outlook coming out on Monday, and we put a graph in there to show what the base effect is going to be for core PCE. So the Fed has inflation targeting 2.2% this year. We're going to get higher than that at some point this spring. And I think if you have any kind of jittery after effects in the bond market from what we've just gone through, there's going to be a reaction to those numbers, even though they're largely statistical quirks. What I'm more interested in, though, is the summer effects with possible kind of getting the gears kind of turning again in some of the services industry, bringing people back to work to try to meet rising demand and what we know is going to be a big shift in consumer sentiment from goods producing to service producing consumption. We have more open jobs already here in the United States than we did at the end of 2019. There's small business employers are finding it hard to fill open jobs. And so a lot of those things could contribute to inflationary pressures that are more kind of economically meaningful than the base effects that we're going to go through in April and May. So I think that's what I'd watch. Do we get a second peak in inflation on a year-over-year basis sometime in July or August? And that I think could turn the markets in a more alarmed direction.
Summer's going to be fascinating for another reason, Katie, as well, not just the one that Brian just explained, but looking ahead to 22. And every time I bring this up, I get pushback that it's too premature, but we've got to have a conversation about deceleration, haven't we? And how to navigate deceleration in the economy from 21 to 22.
Yes, and I think that's a good point, is that we worry about that, especially as systematic traders, because we're looking at short-term moves and alarm signals. And one of the biggest alarm signals we saw this year was just how yields behaved and having short signals in bonds. Another trade cross-asset that's been interesting is that safe haven trade and some of those typical protection stocks, defensive trades, have really lost their steam post-COVID. So that suggests that things are not really as they were pre-COVID to us in terms of correlation structures. And so for us, it's really, that could be the thing that could really terrify the markets if we had some sort of stress that wasn't manageable by a sort of simple standard monetary practice that we used in the past.
Katie, when I think about it, though, coming into 21, just going through the consensus calls cross-asset, let's start with the Treasury market. Higher yields, we reopen. Higher yields at the long end. In the equity market, we reopen. Cyclical trades do well off the back of higher yields. Financials rallying, not just in the US, but in Europe too. Commodities in the mix. Copper's ripped. Oil's ripped. There's one missing factor cross-asset that's not synced up with any of that, Katie. It's been a dollar story. The dollar story just hasn't evolved in the way people anticipated. That huge short position has just been eaten away at as 21 has grown older, largely because we're not seeing synchronized global growth. What do you make of that? That distinction there between everything else, which is doing what we expected off the back of what people thought would be global synchronized growth, and then the dollar's almost kind of the odd one out as this synchronized global growth story is broken down?
That's a good question, and I was just thinking about that the other day, because honestly, the dollar broke down much earlier out of this reflation trade, and that's where currencies are complicated to me, because in some sense, you have sentiment, you have sort of expectations of growth for the US economy, but you also have the impact of risk on, risk off flows of capital. So it gets a little bit more mixed. I also personally think that the dollar theme got hit so hard last year that it sort of lost a little bit of steam, because it really was very, very strong going into end of last year. And so I think pressure of risk off in February, concerns over yields, other things sort of accelerated the dollar sort of to recover a little bit from what was really sort of one of the toughest periods for the dollar over the last few years.
Final word on that, Brian, on the US currency.
Yeah, currencies have been following the news about the virus to a greater extent than I would have expected. I think a lot of the dollar strength against developed market currencies, especially the euro, it comes at a time that we're learning that the U.S. is vaccinating, and it really has the pandemic under control to a greater extent than Europe does, and is unlikely to return to aggressive mitigation strategies the way that certain countries in Europe have. So I think that, on the one hand, is going to favor the dollar. In addition to the fact, whenever you have interest rates rise rapidly, for whatever the reason, whether it's higher inflation expectations or higher real interest rates, you tend to see money flow in that direction in this era of very low global interest rates. So we think the dollar's probably done falling against developed markets. I think if we can get this pause going for another couple of weeks in rates, I think the emerging market currencies could do well. It's hard for those to perform well when you have dollar rates moving up as fast as they have. But yeah. I don't think that's going to happen for much longer.
Hey, Brian, good to see you. Brian Nick there. And Katie, thank you. Come back soon. Katie Kaminsky there, joining us on this global story. Some things make sense and others still don't really. Coming up, the analyst action you need to know. That'll be next in our morning calls. And later, volatility in the small caps starting to weigh on the rotation trade. That conversation still ahead with Morgan Stanley's Dan Skelly. Morgan Stanley downgrading small caps just a number of weeks ago. We'll get to the why and why they're sticking with it in just a moment. From New York, this is Bloomberg.
Right now, about half of U.S. households invest. We'd like to get that number up to 95+%. Investing should be as ubiquitous as shopping online. It should just be something that people do.
Five minutes away from the opening bell in New York City, equity futures up 13 points. We advance around about 1/3 of 1%. Going into the opening bell this Wednesday, let's get you some morning calls. A look at some of the analyst recommendations on Wall Street this morning. We begin first up with Morgan Stanley, upgrading Alcoa to overweight with a $43 price target. The analysts seeing better prospects for aluminum prices as the global macro environment continues improving. That stock is up by 5%. Next up, Wedbush downgrading GameStop to underperform. The analysts saying shares are completely disconnected from fundamentals due to the recent retail trading frenzy. That stock is down about 12.5%. And your third and final call from Wells Fargo, upgrading Estee Lauder to overweight with a $340 price target. The analyst expecting earnings to top expectations with robust numbers filtering out of China. That stock positive by about 2%. Coming up, Morgan Stanley's Dan Skelly downgrading small caps as he sees a move from recovery to expansion. That conversation coming up shortly. Equities doing okay. From New York City this morning, good morning. This is Bloomberg.
Everybody says we should practice before we go to Mars, but some people say we need to practice on the moon. Well, you could practice on the moon, but you can do it at 1/10,000th the cost in the desert in Utah.
with Bloomberg Surveillance, Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrow, and Lisa Abramowitz. Extraordinary market day.
This rally just keeps on going.
But there is a tipping point.
The business team you love to watch. Weekday mornings on Bloomberg Television.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
25 seconds away from the opening bell in New York City. Here's the equity price action on a stock market going into the cash open. Equity futures positive around about 14 points on the S&P, up by about 0.4%. Nasdaq futures up 0.5. Outperformance where the underperformance has been more recently. It's on a Russell, up by 1.3%. We advanced there by about 28 points on the Russell 2000. There's your opening bell. Switch up the board into the bond market. Day two, a testimony for Chairman Powell and Secretary Yellen. Yields up by a couple of basis points now to 164.54 on 10s. Crude higher too, up by 3 percentage points and more to $59.60. And a euro, clean break of the 200-day moving average in yesterday's session, 118.18 on euro dollar, coming in about 0.25%. So that's the cross-asset setup this Wednesday. The market desk with your movers. Here's Kriti Gupta.
Well, good morning, John. We have to take a look at those chip makers because that's really where the action is, especially in Intel. The CEO announcing a massive new manufacturing plan. Of course, this comes on the heels of TSMC also announcing one quite similar. So, of course, you're seeing chip makers really rally this morning at the expense of TSMC. I want to take a look at those oil names as well, because as you mentioned, you are seeing oil just a little bit stronger today. Some of that coming off of yesterday's weakness, some of that coming off of that ship stuck in the Suez Canal. About 30% of the traffic there accounts for oil and LNG ships. So that, of course, taking some of those oil majors with it. And I really want to bring to your attention some of those major news makers. Let's just kick it off with Tesla rallying in line with Bitcoin this morning, announcing it will now accept crypto payments, joining that crowd. And of course, you are seeing GameStop under pressure, missing their estimates, especially as analysts were expecting that this would finally be that moment where you saw them actually post some solid revenue after 10 quarters of losses. And then, of course, on the downside, you're seeing Viacom drop as well. This, of course, coming off of a $3 billion equity offering, John.
Kriti, thank you. Let's turn to the market right now, 90 seconds in at the top of the pile. Energy, it's been really tough over the last couple of days, over the past week for that matter. Energy up by 2.38%. Utilities at the bottom down 0.6. The S&P 500 up 0.4%. Over the last week or so, the pillars of the reflation trade losing some momentum and small caps and energy stocks breaking down over the past week. For more, let's get to Kaylee Lyons for that story. Hey, Kaylee.
Hey, John. Well, if you're looking for one of the most dramatic examples of this pause we've seen in that cyclical rotation, it really is the small caps. Yes, the small cap Russell 2000 is attempting to stage a comeback today after its losses of 3.5% in the Tuesday session, but it still has some work to do to recover that. And of course, yesterday it posted its widest margin of underperformance relative to the large cap S&P 500 in a year. And with that, the Russell 2000 has lost some of its edge. It's fallen off its best relative strength versus the S&P since 2018. And that, of course, is to some extent a reminder of just how far this group of stocks had run prior to the recent weakness. And as for the stocks within the index that have been driving that weakness, it is the biggest heavyweights within it that have all been down over the last week. They range in market cap from $13 to $18.5 billion. Still, we call them small caps. That includes GameStop. It was down more than 9% on the week as of yesterday's close. Of course, as Kriti just mentioned, adding to those losses this morning. And other stocks like Plug Power, Penn National, and Novavax have been big drags as well. And when you look at the short-term strength in small cap stocks more broadly relative to other major indices, it's actually quite weak. In the Russell 2000, only 10% of the members in the index are trading above their 10-day moving averages. In the S&P small cap 600, that number's even lower, just 6%. Compare that with 34% in the S&P and half of the stocks in the Dow. So large caps are faring better than small, at least in the short term, John.
Kelly, thank you. Kelly Lyons on an important story. Morgan Stanley making maybe the call of the last few weeks. Dan Skelly writing the following: we may be quickly exiting the recovery phase and moving into expansion, leading us to recently downgrade our view on small caps, which have historically been a key early cycle beneficiary. While we continue to favor cyclical, selectivity is key. Dan Skelly joins us now for more. Dan, it was a really interesting call at the time, and the Russell has rolled over about 7 percentage points coming into today's session over the last couple of weeks. Can you help me understand the cycle call? Because that's really the framework for you and the team over the last 9-10 months or so. It's taken the cycle and looking at where you think we are in that cycle and using that as a playbook for where you allocate into the equity market. What informs you of where we are in this cycle right now?
I think that's a great summary, Jonathan, and thanks for having me on this morning. So if you zoom out for a second and think about this cycle, its unique epicenter and root cause with the virus, its unique and unprecedented policy responses, as well as the speed of those policy responses, which came faster than in any other recovery that we've seen, we think this cycle could run hotter but shorter. And so what I mean by that is that we're seeing a much more accelerated recovery in terms of retail sales, manufacturing, job gains, et cetera. And so we think we could continue to see strong gains here economically. The reality is, however, that comes with its own issues as well in terms of the potential for rising inflation. And so simply what we're saying today, Jonathan, is that some of these early cycle beneficiaries like small caps, which have run so well for the past year or so since we made the call, and Mike Wilson made the call in April of 20, maybe time to take a breather.
Dan, when you say stronger and shorter, you do realize that a lot of people who hear that will skip to the end game. So can I do that just briefly? Will you indulge me? When you say shorter, what are you thinking about here? And are you thinking about the end point? And what does it look like?
Yeah, absolutely. We're not at the end point yet, but we are starting to fade some of the early cycle trades like small caps, which, if you look at Russell 2000, it's outperformed NASDAQ by 50% since the lows last spring, outperformed S&P by 40% since that same time frame. So we think the lion's share of that outperformance leg has passed. However, as it pertains to the economic cycle, to answer your question, we think there could be a couple years left to go. But let's just, again, put that in context, Jonathan. The last 4 cycles were some of the longest recoveries in history. If I look at the last 4 recoveries, they ranked number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 6 out of the last 34 economic cycles in terms of duration. So they were atypically long. We think, again, because of the power of policy and some of the things we're seeing in the real economy, we don't think we're going to have that kind of 10, 15-year cycle this time around. We think it's going to be more truncated around 4 to 5 years. So, yes, still a few more years to go.
Those super long, shallow cycles, Dan, were hugely beneficial to the growth part of the equity market because growth was scared and growth was low. Dan, what does that mean for the winner of this cycle, so to speak? Because we can talk about the winner of the recovery, the early stage. It's been small caps. It's been a cyclical story that you and I have gone back and forth on for ages. Energy, financials, all of that good stuff. What do you think wins the cycle in the same way that tech and growth equities won the last cycle?
Sure. So I don't know in particular, Jonathan, if there'll be one pronounced winner like there was back, in the 2008-2020 cycle when it was all concentrated on mega cap FANG. We don't think it'll be as kind of concentrated this time around. We think it'll be a bit more diffused into different sectors. We still like large cap value. They don't have some of the valuation, some of the cost pressures that small companies have. So, large cap financials, still like that idea. Large cap industrials. We have an infrastructure bill coming potentially later this year. Still like that theme. That being said, with the dramatic move in rates higher in the last 6 to 8 weeks, you're now getting an opportunity to pick off opportunistically some attractive growth stocks. And I think while we'd all admit we're going to eat out more and maybe go to the movies this year, the world is never going back to the way it was exactly in 2019. It's going to be a hybrid future in terms of work from home, remote work, all different types of consumer tendencies. And thus, there are going to be growth winners as well. So, Jonathan, to answer your question, I think it's going to be a mix, and we're still sticking to a bit of that barbell on the large cap value side, and on the other end, some of the GARPy ideas.
Dan, always good to catch up, and appreciate your transparency on a really interesting call that's developed in the last couple of weeks. Dan Skelly on downgrading small caps over the past month or so with the team over at Morgan Stanley. Dan, thank you. Let's turn back to the equity market. A little bit of a lift at the market desk with your movers. Here's Kriti Gupta.
Well, John, all the action seems to be in the crypto space. This, of course, after Tesla came out, Elon Musk, I should say, came out and said that the Tesla will now accept accept those crypto payments. So you can see Bitcoin really rallying there, along with some of those crypto-exposed stocks. Tesla, of course, joining the likes of Overstock or PayPal. Somewhere else I really want to look for some gains is those travel names. You saw some broad weakness yesterday. Today, you're seeing a little bit of a recovery in those cruise lines and those airlines as well. Airbnb seems to be the stark underperformer here. This, of course, coming as Ryanair CEO says there is a robust summer ahead, and parts of Europe is starting to reconsider some of those restrictions they were so strong about. Of course, you saw some strength in the European session and are now perhaps seeping a little bit stateside, John.
Creddy, thank you. That conversation with Michael O'Leary a little bit earlier with Guy Johnson. Guy will bring you more of that conversation. Michael basically saying that people aren't going to put up with these shutdowns, these lockdowns. People are going to rebel. We asked the follow-up question, do you think that's going to lead to more flights? Is that the strategy? And of course, Michael O'Leary pushed back. We'll try and bring in some of that conversation a little bit later. Coming up, we'll stick on Europe, though, grappling with reopening of the vaccination process across the continent. That conversation is up next with Jason Draho of UBS. From New York City this morning, 10 minutes into the session, your equity market in America higher. The S&P 500 up 0.5%. The small caps delivering a little bit of outperformance, snapping back. This is Bloomberg.
Of the world's trade travels by sea. At any given time, around 5,000 ships are on the ocean carrying containers. Without them, the global economy would collapse.
Many of those containers pass through here, Singapore, the world's second largest port. The industry accounts for 7% of the country's GDP.
But the industry is under pressure. The uneven recovery from the pandemic is creating a shortage of containers where they're needed most and driving bottlenecks at major ports. It sent freight prices soaring.
Since the beginning of COVID-19, these are levels of shipments that we've never seen before.
Chinese New Year marks a seasonal turn for freighters when rates are renegotiated for the next year. Companies must choose whether to swallow the financial hit or pass on the cost. It's a decision that could bring new headwinds for the global economic recovery.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
Continued shortfalls in production are not distributed fairly across different contracting countries. The EU is the only OECD producer that continues to export vaccines to countries that have production capacities of their own. But when these countries do not export to the EU, there is no reciprocity.
The EU cracking down on vaccine exports, potentially escalating tensions with allies amid a third wave of infections. This is Germany's Merkel, the Chancellor, dropping plans for an Easter lockdown, calling the move a mistake in a rare 180. Let's bring in Maria Tadeo from Brussels for more. Morning, Maria.
Good morning. So, Jonathan, two things happening in Europe. Clearly, that confirmation that the European Union is getting much tougher when it comes to exporting vaccines. They don't want to call it a ban, but it does risk escalating tensions already, which are flying high on the global supply chain. Now, they say that going forward, if you want to ship out vaccines outside of the European Union, you're going to have to show proportionality and you're going to have to show reciprocity. They say it has to be made into a two-way street. Now, on the one factor, if you look at the numbers, there is a case to be made that the European Union is exporting, but is not receiving that many. But it also shows that there's a real anxiety that's really kicking in Europe because of that slow rollout, because the numbers compared to other countries do not look as good, and also because infections are jumping. Today we had new numbers that show in 19 of the 27 member states in the European Union, infections are going up. In 8 of them, the death rate has also gone up, and that's as a number of new measures are kicking in across the continent. We know that the French have gone for a regional 4-week lockdown. The Belgians today saying that everything that is non-essential will have to shut down. And again, Angela Merkel today putting out a very, very clear apology saying that it's a U-turn on the German policy, but also fearing perhaps social backlash, that hard lockdown that was expected to take place in Easter is not going to happen anymore. Again, it shows that A, the political tensions are flying high, but 2, the doses, that remains still a challenge for Europe.
Maria, just quickly here, I struggle with the language that the Europeans use around this issue. They talk about countries as if countries are producing and exporting vaccines. Countries don't do that, companies do. And in the United States, there are a form of export controls, but it's a de facto export control because it's in the contract to serve the US contract first for the producers in the United States. So what are they talking about?
Yes, and that's a very good point, because when we say the European Union is exporting, what it means is that, of course, they're being made here in the European Union, but they're servicing contracts that have been agreed with other countries, and it's a pharma company that's essentially making those vaccines. The issue here is that they do not trust some of the companies. There's very bad blood with AstraZeneca, and that tension is going in crescendo. The European Union does feel that they have not received the contracts and the doses that they need, and this is about piling the pressure on AstraZeneca in particular.
I'd love to get a commissioner on the program to talk about this. The offer's open. I know the booking team is working on it, and we can actually have a proper conversation instead of talking past each other about these issues. Maria, it's good to see you. Thank you. Maria Tadeo out of Brussels. Some breaking economic data out of Europe this morning. The PMIs were better, largely ignored in this market. PMIs in America. Here's Mike McKee.
Good morning, John, and not a bad morning for manufacturing or services in the U.S. According to market, the PMI for manufacturing goes to 59 from 58.6. A touch lower than expectations, but still a good number. Same story with the services number, up to 60.0 from 59.8. Services, of course, the industry that was shut down by the pandemic. The composite, a little bit lower than it had been, 59.1 from 59.5. These are the preliminary numbers for March, of course. And the interesting thing about these, John, is that in the United States, these might be real. In Europe, we did see that pop you mentioned for manufacturing and a rise in services. But given all the lockdowns Maria was just talking about, a lot of people think that's a false dawn.
Well, that's the difference, isn't it? We have a 60 handle on services in America, Mike, and we have what in the Eurozone right now? 48.8, I think the services prelim read was for the month of March. I mean, that's the distinction. 60 is punchy, 48 is still contraction territory.
Yeah, absolutely. The Europeans have not been able to open their service industries, and there doesn't seem to be any likelihood that's going to happen soon. It's the manufacturing numbers that were good there, but will those hold up if they have to shut everything down?
Mike, thank you. Let's turn to Jason Draho of UBS, expecting the vaccine rollout to kickstart the reflation trade. He writes the following: vaccine supply will increase substantially in the second quarter, facilitating the economic reopening, leading to higher GDP and corporate earnings. Taking all this together, major economies will enter the reflation phase of the recovery in the second quarter. Jason joins us now. So, Jason, let's talk about that. It feels like this market's largely got ahead of that, despite the bad news in Europe that we've seen play out in the last couple of months. European travel stocks have done pretty well through much of this year. European financials have done really well through much of this year. Is there anything that's been held back by this slow rollout as far as you can see, at least in this market?
Well, I think what we've seen over the past week is a little bit of concerns about just maybe, a little too much optimism, say going back about a month ago, in terms of how fast the recovery would take place. Given that we had the news, it was about a month ago that we knew that we would get a fiscal package in the U.S. of around 1.9 trillion. We saw, certainly in the U.S., but even globally, cases were coming down of COVID. This was before the second wave really materialized in Europe. I think people were quite optimistic. That's when we saw growth expectations rise higher, and we saw that the performance in the markets, we saw the rates go higher. What's happening in the past week or two is now we're realizing things aren't always going to go perfectly smoothly. We're seeing the rise, obviously, cases in Europe, potential lockdowns, even temporary, delaying, not, I think, derailing this recovery. Maybe it's only by about a month. But I think the market's reaction to that, I think, of the past week is kind of consistent with, the view that, all right, well, there's going to be some bumps in the road. This is sort of, I think, still a temporary move. It's more about the timing of when this happens and when the reflation trade really continues. But I think that's what you're seeing in the market right now is a bit of a pause, almost on a mini kind of growth scare, or at least
not quite as much growth optimism as we had about a month ago.
So, Jason, you want to stick with the same strategy you started the year with, though?
Stick, but it's sort of modifying. So something that we've done with some allocations is shifting a little bit more out of some of the small cap, mid caps have done very well over the past year. I mean, the Russell 2000 is up 125% from a year ago this time. Shifting a little more towards value. So we think about as a recovery trade, small cap, mid cap, a little to less extent has done very well. Now, what's the next stage of this recovery? I think value has done well, but there's certainly probably more to go on a relative basis for value versus small cap. So we think, in terms of like where we are in the cycle and the stages, I think the stage is now set more for continued performance of value stocks. Some of that is predicated on the view that we think rates will continue to rise. But just fundamentally, when we looked historically at when does value perform well, certainly relative to growth, it's an environment where you see nominal GDP growth at like 4.5%, 5%. And I think we're safely going to clear that hurdle in the U.S. this year and probably next year as well. That leads to higher earnings growth. So just from a fundamental perspective, this is an environment where you should still see good catch-up performance from value sectors, and that's kind of what we still think will play out. It's not a straight line. There's going to be some choppiness. We've seen that in the past week with financials and energy, but ultimately over a 6-month horizon, we still think that thesis is going to play out.
Do you think it's dependent on growth continuing at similar levels into 22, Jason, or do you think it's dependent on higher rates?
So I think it's ultimately both, but I think higher growth that continues to next year that leads to higher inflation that probably pushes rates higher. So they're not sort of two separate factors. I think that the issue is more about how long the trade lasts. For say for value outperforming and by how much. If we clearly get acceleration of growth in the second quarter that lasts into say the third, maybe fourth quarter, but it really starts to moderate next year. I'm not saying it will, but suppose that's the case.
Yeah,
this could be a situation where value outperforms for 3 or 4 months and by 10 percentage points. If this really continues at a very high level of growth into next year, rates rise even higher, perhaps outperformance could last longer and be by more significant magnitude. So to me, it's the length and the magnitude of the outperformance more so than will it outperform. I think that's the key difference.
Interesting. Well, Jason, the reason I ask about the growth rates question is because, yes, they should correlate. If growth picks up, arguably the long end should pick up too. But a central bank might have a different idea. And so far, they've been comfortable with the move in yields. Jason, that's why I asked the question. We've got central banks committed to keeping things floored at the front end for a number of years now. And there's some real doubt about what happens at the longer end. We've seen some central banks push back, the Federal Reserve, not yet. And I'm trying to work out, Jason, how the banks trade fits in between that debate at the moment.
Well, ultimately, I think what it means is we get, the curve ultimately continues to steepen because the Fed's going to keep pushing back, certainly for the time being. So the front end stays anchored. I think that people start to buy in that the Fed is actually going to stay on hold longer than the market currently believes. We can see the disconnect between the dot plot versus what the market's pricing. So we get the curve continue to steepen. We know for the last 3 cycles that the 2-10s curve has gone up to about 250 basis points. Right now it's around 150 basis points. So maybe it won't, the curve won't steepen to that level and quite as quickly as it has come in the past coming out of recession. But I think the direction is in that path. And so we may get there next year, which is more perhaps a slow burn for the curve steepening, which all else equals is positive for financials. And if that's predicated on better growth and the Fed being committed to stay on hold, which I think the market doesn't fully believe that's the case. But I think that plays out, that's, I think, a tailwind for financials more over, the next 6 to 12 months, more so than something that should materialize in the next, 2 or 3 months.
Jason, just a final question from me. It's a question I've revisited on this program a couple of times over the last few months. Is there a sector you're more comfortable relative to the other out of the two, energy or financials? Which one?
I think I have, higher conviction about financials because it's predicated more on the economic outlook, certainly in the U.S. Financials, at least in the U.S., are much more domestically oriented in terms of where they get their revenue. I think we have a clear idea of what the policy outlook is going to be like. The challenge, I think, for energy a little bit is also just, there's dynamics that take place in terms of supply, whether it's OPEC, whether the production cuts can materialize or stay in place. So there's external factors beyond the U.S. that drives oil, whereas I think financials is a more domestic U.S. call, and I have higher conviction on the outlook for the U.S. over the next 1 to 2 years than I do on the global environment. So all else equal, that would favor me to at least financials versus energy in terms of my conviction level between the two.
Understood. Jason, always great to get some clarity from you. Jason Draho there of UBS. Your equity market still positive on the S&P, negative on the NASDAQ with some movers. Here's Kriti Gupta.
Well, John, on a sector basis, is really energy that's the key story, leading the pack here, and financials coming in second place, following those yields higher. You're also seeing utilities and consumer staples lag a little bit. This, of course, those defensive trades from yesterday flipped on their head today. And, of course, all the energy in that energy market, the Suez Canal, that's really where all the action is. You can see those maps on the Bloomberg terminal.
Kriti, thank you. Coming up, the market-moving events you need to be watching. That'll be next in our trading diary from New York. This is Bloomberg.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Equities up on the S&P by 1/3 of 1%, on the Russell up by 0.7 of 1%. Your underperformance from the Nasdaq, we're down there by 1/4 of 1%. Let's get you the trading diary. What you need to be watching this week at the top of the hour: Fed Chair Jay Powell and Secretary Janet Yellen facing Congress for a second day of testimony, plus more Fed speak throughout the week, including Vice Chair Richard Clarida. We get $180 billion in Treasury supply throughout the week, including Thursday's $62 billion sale of 7-year notes. Also happening on Thursday, tech CEOs returning to Capitol Hill, and President Biden giving his first official news conference. It's been a while. And rounding out the week on Friday with US core PCE data, Mike McKee will be covering that for you. From New York, this was the Countdown to the Open. Continue the conversation on Twitter at FerroTV. This is Bloomberg.
Minority myth wasn't something that was fabricated by the Asian Americans. It was created as a tool to alienate the Black and the Asian American communities, and it was incredibly successful.
We know that racism didn't begin yesterday. We know it's probably not going to end tomorrow, but it is our job to make sure that there's progress and we keep people safe, give people dignity.
I spent a lot of time last year to just listen, to understand, to reflect, and understand what I could do as a leader of this organization.
For many years, we've been very shareholder focused, and now there really is much more of a community requirement.
The economic downturn in the U.S., we're seeing unemployment and income losses affecting women more than men.
2/3 of the jobs lost in South Africa were women's jobs. So I think we're in a moment of crisis.
Clearly, our societies are reproducing, not producing inequality.
We need better public policy, and we need companies to step up.
Our generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
Months after Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico is still in peril. Huge swaths of the island are still without power, running water, or access to medical care. Experts estimate that it will take years before these services are restored island-wide. Much of the blame has been placed on FEMA for a slow response in comparison to recent disasters on the mainland. But recovery from a disaster of this complexity and scale has proven more challenging than anyone anticipated. And filling the gaps between an overextended public sector and a suffering populace falls on the private citizens. Robert Anderson is a Puerto Rico resident of 4 years.
The eye of the storm came in south of El Yunque, swept up towards San Juan, and out to Arecibo. Everything on the right-hand side is what we call the dirty side of the storm.
This isn't his first time in a disaster zone. With a military and telecom background, Anderson worked on repairing damaged cell phone towers in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Some might be tempted to label him a disaster capitalist, seeking lucrative government contracts for his expertise. But as Anderson finds himself in the middle of a humanitarian crisis, he and his associates are developing a variety of pro bono recovery projects that target the island's hardest hit areas.
I see two Puerto Ricos. We're here in San Juan. They have telecommunications restored. They may or may not have power, but basic services are in place. They're able to get food. They're able to buy things. They're surviving. And when you look outside of the San Juan area, you can go 15 minutes from here and find areas that are devastated. I'm working on the devastated side.
Today, he's put together a boots-on-the-ground mission to provide medical care to some of the island's most isolated and vulnerable residents. Steve Berenbaum is one of Anderson's business associates. He offered an extra car and a set of hands.
So we received an initial report from a nurse that was out in the area. We're headed to the northeast region of Utuado for some people that are in need of urgent medical assistance.
Dr. Sally Priester is a physician from San Juan. She filled a van with medical supplies at her own expense and brought along a team of nurses. Google Maps estimated our first destination to be a 90-minute drive. But it didn't account for obstacles like this. Our first stop was the home of an 82-year-old blind Vietnam veteran. His roof was blown off by the storm, and he's been living alone in a back shed for nearly 2 months.
His cane actually got broken in the storm, so he's limited mobility. He has a number of medical ailments. Dr. Priester's having a look at him. We called the VA. They're going to get him set up with what he needs, get him stabilized so he can then be transported either to an evacuation center or off the island. It's when the chain gets broken, when those families that are connected to them leave the island or take off, these guys get left at the end of the road, and it's tough.
FEMA was not officially part of Robert's team, and their arrival caught everyone by surprise. Their job here was to survey and report back to their superiors, and did not come with medical aid of any kind.
People think that FEMA is there to hand out bottles of water. It's not what they do. FEMA has a role to play. They have a very specific role. They bring in ships, they bring in airplanes, they bring in tractor trailers with pallets of things. But they're a big machine, and there's gaps in that thing. And you're seeing one of the gaps here, and we help fill that role. These guys are in a bad situation before, and now they're struggling for real basic things. One of the risks that you run is people going from fear to hopelessness. Those are the folks that we're trying to reach.
And how are they reached? How are they even found?
Word of mouth, mostly.
And what's your role in all this?
Ghost in the machine. I'm lucky enough to be able to communicate with folks in FEMA, the state of Puerto Rico.
For a ghost, Robert makes his presence well known. Not only was he the de facto leader of the mission, now with FEMA in tow, he created his own maps to survey storm damage.
So we're right here.
And delivered them to FEMA HQ free of charge.
I have pretty good reach.
Perhaps that's how he managed to earn himself a coveted FEMA badge without actually working for them. And it's these relationships that allow him to operate more efficiently than an NGO or a government agency.
We're able to resolve problems at a different level.
Our next stop was on a mountaintop, a family of 11 struggling to care for their special needs brother in what was left of their house.
Probably we are the first health team to come and visit this family.
Muy bien, todo muy bien.
The patient has Down syndrome. He is all day in bed. The difficulty with this is the patient cannot be alone. The most important thing is that you need to take care of the chronic disease besides disability, because they have been not going to a doctor, and no doctor has come in here yet.
So we need a refill of this medication.
After maybe 54 days, it's not getting better. And the only way that you can be able to see that is coming to the ground, drive, and see the people and talk to the people.
You can see San Juan from here, but you can't get there. It's like the Emerald City.
On this stop, we caught word that a man living alone at the edge of the jungle was in need of care.
So we decided to take a little detour, come up here and check out and see what's going on. One of the challenges is to find those people that are at the end of these roads that need help.
¿Pero por qué estás solo? ¿Por qué estás por acá tan solo? I'm asking about why he's alone right here. He said things of life happens. Yeah, I'm here by myself. So ¿dónde vive acá? En la parte de... This is not a job. To do this, you need to have passion for what you can do. You're not going to get paid.
It's said in disaster response and emergency response that the real first responders are your neighbors. You don't need to wait for a lucrative FEMA contract to go out and do good and to help the community.
In the end, do you feel like you're making a difference?
Lives you touch and people that you can affect. I don't really think about it in those terms.
But why do you do it?
It helps me sleep at night. I think it's as much for the people that are going out to help and do things as it is for the people that you affect.
Whether out of altruism, or the lure of a paid gig, or some mixture of the two, Anderson hopes to stay here to help shape Puerto Rico's future.
Puerto Rico's essentially been a colony for 400 years. It was treated poorly by the Spanish. It was not treated well by the United States when they first got here. Puerto Rico can continue in the way that it's always been, or Puerto Rico can rebuild itself like nothing that's ever been. And we have to do everything we can to make that real. That's the bottom line.
Okay, traders, I'm going to place new order to sell short British pound. The price I'm looking to sell at 137.114. Okay, so 137.114. This is the price where I'm trying to sell, and I want to sell British pound. So if you're looking to trade British pound, here is your chance. You have to place an order and wait until the price will reach this level. I'll speak to you later, guys. Okay, position opened on British pound at 137.114. That's a short position. So well done, guys. If you decided to trade this pair, you're in. So let's see how long we have to wait until we will collect profit from this pair. Stay safe.
When I met him first online, I found him to be really sweet. I think I was the one who was talking for an hour. He was just listening.
When we met, I saw her. She was beautiful, intelligent, and kind, which was, I mean, something that I was looking for.
Anshu and Sumit are one of about 12 million couples that get married in India every year. Unlike their parents' generation, they're not from two close villages, but from two cities on opposite sides of the country. And their love didn't start through community matchmaking, marriage brokers, or classified ads in newspapers, but began online.
So we met through jeevansathi.com. So it's basically an online portal where we have detailed profile of different grooms and brides.
It makes a lot of remote profiles who are located in distant areas more accessible.
Thanks to growing internet and smartphone usage, matrimony websites and apps in India are starting to disrupt the matchmaking industry. More and more people are finding their partners at the click of a mouse. Jeevan said,
Okay, guys, it was a fast trade, fast money trade. I'm going to place a stop on profit. The price I'm looking to sell 137.086, just right here. Okay, 137.086. I think we will move further to Let me calculate. 157. Okay, I'm going to 137.04 right now. It will not let me. Let's do 137. Okay, if it will move further. We will keep our stop on profit at 137.08. Okay? Please place stop on profit at this level. It's nice, look like support level, or as you can see, nice support level. We'll put a little bit higher just to make sure that nothing will happen. Okay? Okay, this is it. We have nice, right now, if it will close in our case, we'll have 3 pips in profit. In your case, it's all about how much broker pays you. Like I'm telling you all guys, let's see, it's moving down substantially, so let's move down to 137.04. Okay. Please do follow this trade and please place stop on profit. Don't wait for some magic happen, or maybe this pair will go to 0 and you will make lots of money. It doesn't work this way. Where they trade us, we trade on 1 minute chart. So make sure that you will follow. If you started follow my trades, I don't want to see disappointed people that place trade and then after we feel this trade executed with profit, somebody would end up without closing the trade. Okay, at this moment, stop on profit at 137.04. Stay safe.
Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren has become a symbol of everything the Republican Party stands against.
Everyone gets a right to basic health care. We need strong oversight of these banks.
A legal scholar and a consumer advocate turned politician, Warren has branded herself as a champion of the working class and made a career out of standing up to big business. While rumors of a 2020 presidency bid remain just that,
I'm not running for president.
her Senate seat is up for re-election in 2018, and Republicans are already pumping millions into super PACs to defeat her. This is the story of how a law professor and politician came to be seen as the biggest threat to Republican values and the greatest hope for progressive America. Elizabeth Warren was born Elizabeth Ann Herron, the youngest of 3 siblings, on June 22, 1949 in Oklahoma City to middle-class parents. After waiting tables to help her family pay the bills, Warren became a star on the high school debate team. She landed a scholarship to George Washington University at the age of 16, but 2 years later dropped out to marry her high school sweetheart, Jim Warren. By 1980, Warren was a mother of 2, divorced and remarried, had earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Houston, a juris degree from Rutgers, and practicing law in New Jersey. Warren then went on to become an influential law professor, teaching, lecturing, and publishing highly cited work on bankruptcy and commercial law at 7 universities around the country, eventually settling at Harvard Law School. But Warren wasn't always a liberal lion.
Elizabeth Warren used to be a Republican, actually.
That's Stephen Dennis.
I'm a Senate reporter for Bloomberg. Around the time that Elizabeth Warren switched parties, she became a fierce opponent of a Republican drive to make it much harder to file for bankruptcy. She fought that for a decade. It ended up passing anyways.
While her efforts ultimately failed, her warning calls were heard in 2008.
We're in the midst of a serious financial crisis. Our entire economy is in danger, and without immediate action by Congress, America could slip into a financial panic, and a distressing scenario would unfold.
Professor Warren was tapped to help with oversight in the government bailout.
She would excoriate bankers and their bonuses and their practices.
Why should the U.S. taxpayer alone carry city?
She proposed a series of tough regulations, which became the basis for much of the Dodd-Frank financial law that we have today. That sort of catapulted her to national stardom, particularly among the progressive left.
Encouraged by her newfound notoriety, Warren declared her bid for the U.S. Senate on September 14, 2011. During the race, her opponent Scott Brown tried to derail Warren by accusing her of falsely claiming Native American heritage, a controversy that earned her the nickname Pocahontas. Nevertheless, she was victorious and won the Senate seat by a comfortable margin. She used her new tenure to challenge everyone, from banking regulators and Treasury officials to members of Wall Street and Congress.
I'm really concerned that too big to fail has become too big for trial. We need tough new laws to hold corporate executives personally accountable. No one should be above the law.
She called for Wells Fargo CEO John Stump to resign for fraud, introduced the Bank on Student Loans Fairness Act, and reintroduced the 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act. In 2016, after staying silent during the Democratic primary battle, Warren finally endorsed Hillary Clinton and had some harsh words for candidate Trump.
Donald Trump is a loud, nasty, thin-skinned fraud who has never risked anything for anyone, and that is just one of the many reasons he will never be president of the United States.
But she was wrong.
The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer.
Warren wasted no time resisting Trump's agenda.
Have you ever managed or overseen a $1 trillion loan program?
I have not.
How about a $1 billion loan program?
I have not.
Okay. In the Donald Trump era, Elizabeth Warren has been playing defense and trying to prevent Donald Trump and his cabinet appointees from rolling back protections that she helped enact.
Warren actually found herself rebuked by Mitch McConnell for reading a letter by Coretta Scott King about Jeff Sessions' record on racism during his confirmation.
She was warned. She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted.
That moment became something that billboards, on T-shirts, bumper stickers, slogans, and that really galvanized a lot of support for her. It's been very hard for Republicans to get much of anything done this year, and that's at least in part to this resistance movement that Elizabeth Warren has helped champion.
We are here to fight back.
Enough of Elizabeth Warren. Like you,
millions of dollars are being funneled to defeat Warren in the midterm elections in 2018. But it's the rumors of a 2020 presidential bid that has further prompted powerful donors to fund her opposition, often using the same playbook of constant and ruthless ad campaigns that many believe helped Trump win in 2016. It's anyone's guess if she will endure what Hillary could not.
You know, the question for Elizabeth Warren is whether she can go from being a liberal firebrand to somebody who can regularly get 60 votes for initiatives in the Senate and 218 in the House and drive an agenda, and whether she can bring together coalitions for political victories. That's the challenge, and we'll see what happens.
Okay, guys, position closed on British pound at 137.04. You've done it if you followed my trade, and if you placed an order, well done. You made 10 pips in profit, just right here. So let's move on. Let's move to another pair. In our case, we got £1,000 in profit. In your case, you might have per pip £30, £10, £15. All information, how to find out how much you get per pip or what kind of broker to use, you will get from our strategy. It's on company.co.uk. You can get on Redline the strategy web address, and you can get the strategy and you can find out all the information you need to become a successful day trader. Stay safe. Well done. It was a nice trade. It took us, about 15 minutes to make decent profit. I'll speak to you later.
Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, has made some powerful opponents.
He doesn't know me, never met me, doesn't know what I'm all about. I think they're very rude statements, and frankly, tell him I will remember those statements.
My message to Donald Trump and his team is that, your views of Islam are ignorant.
He's the first Muslim mayor of a major Western capital and proud of it. This is how Sadiq Khan went from the son of Pakistani immigrants to a lawyer, lawmaker, and now the mayor of London. Khan's parents emigrated from Pakistan. His father was a bus driver, his mother a stay-at-home seamstress. The 10-strong Khan family squeezed into a 3-bedroom flat in South London. He wanted to be a dentist, but TV in the 1980s convinced him otherwise.
Objection!
LA law with its swagger and ill-fitting suits caught Khan's eye. He graduated in 1991 with a degree in law from North London University and joined a human rights firm. Khan worked a number of high-profile cases, often clashing with London's Metropolitan Police Force. But he had bigger political ambitions.
This is what being a new MP is like, squatting on a bench in the absence of an office, dealing with letters from constituents.
Reports are just coming in of an explosion here in London.
And there's just explosions, and then it was just smoke everywhere.
Everyone's just asking what's happened.
Only 2 months after Khan entered the Commons as a Member of Parliament, London was attacked by Islamist extremists.
That day will stay with me for the rest of my life.
He spoke out against the attacks both as a London MP and as a Muslim.
He has been very clear about his opposition to violence, opposition to terrorism, and has set out to make the case for a more open and peaceful Islam.
That's Thomas Penny, one of Bloomberg's Westminster correspondents.
Here is a man who is a Muslim, and he is standing up and being open and straightforward and being clear that the problem here is not Islam, but it's Islamic extremism.
In 2015, a decade after the attacks, Khan ran for mayor of London, and his faith was back in the headlines. His opponent, Zach Goldsmith, trying to link Khan to radical Islam.
The debate got again personal and nasty. The Goldsmith camp has called Khan extreme and accused him of associating with, quote, those who seek to do our police and capital harm.
It's a pattern of behaviour.
Even the former Prime Minister David Cameron repeated the allegations.
He shared a platform with Sajil Shahid, the man who trained the ringleader of the 7/7 attacks and accused the United States of bringing 9/11 on themselves.
But the smears didn't stick.
Zach Goldsmith ran a very negative campaign that was based on what people knew was a lie.
This election was not without controversy. And I'm so proud that London has today chosen hope over fear and unity over division.
After taking the mayor's office with a comfortable majority, Khan has brought a business-like efficiency to the role, scrapping expensive vanity projects like the Garden Bridge and the new Routemaster buses, which cost £350,000 each. The former lawyer who used to fight the police in court is now praised for his close relationship with them.
I was talking to a very senior police officer in the Metropolitan Police who said there was a sea change when he went into City Hall, and the police were saying how much they welcomed this because they knew where they stood and he was more straightforward to work with. So he works like a lawyer, he works like a government minister.
Khan's kept his faith at the fore. He's an outspoken voice for moderate Muslims across the world.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Now, by giving the impression that Islam and the West are incompatible, you're playing into the hands of the extremists.
The ongoing spat between Khan and US President Donald Trump escalated when Trump went after Khan, misquoting him on Twitter just hours after the terrorist attacks of June 3rd, 2017. Khan's now one of the most prominent Labour politicians in the UK. In fact, a recent poll of Londoners found Khan was more trusted to keep the country safe from terrorism than the Prime Minister or the Labour leader. His story of going from the son of an immigrant bus driver to the mayor of one of the greatest cities in the world plays well with Londoners. But can he appeal to the rest of the nation? Has Khan got his eye on the top job? And is the UK ready for a Muslim Prime Minister?
What does it take to change the world? A big army? A cure to a pandemic? A revolution? All of these take either a lot of people, thousands of hours, or massive amounts of space. But for Julian Assange, all he needs is one room, an internet connection, and the world will listen. Assange is located here, and more specifically, right here. And from that location, he's posted government secrets, classified documents, and leaked emails from some of the world's most powerful people. And in doing so, has been labeled a hero, a villain, a nihilist, and everything in between. This is how an Australian programmer sequestered in the Ecuadorian embassy in London became one of the most influential and notorious people in the world. Born in 1971 in Townsville, Australia, Assange has always been on the move. Living in over 30 homes by the time he was in his mid-teens, Assange, along with his mother and half-brother, finally settled down in Melbourne. His introduction to hacking started at 16 when he was given a Commodore 64, which he attached to a modem. He attended the University of Melbourne, where he studied programming, physics, and mathematics. He never graduated, but that doesn't mean he didn't get an education. By 1991, Assange hacked into the Pentagon, U.S. Navy, and other branches of the U.S. government. In 1996, he was caught by the Australian Federal Police and charged with over 30 counts of hacking and computer-related crimes. He didn't get any jail time, but he was fined $2,100.
I think the first taste of what would come later was the hacking that he did as a young programmer, and that really sort of foreshadowed a healthy skepticism of the use and abuse of technology by governments.
That's Vernon Silver.
I'm a reporter for Bloomberg's investigations team.
Assange's youth as a hacker laid the foundation for him to start WikiLeaks in 2006. But what is WikiLeaks? It's a website that posts unfiltered, usually classified documents. What separates it from every other media outlet is that they have no editorial hierarchy. With a publication like the New York Times, information comes in, they take that information, package it, then disseminate it for the public to see. WikiLeaks, however, cuts out the middleman.
WikiLeaks gathers information, most of it given to them anonymously. So what they're doing is really very simple. They get the information in one end from who gives it to them and out the other with sometimes minimal interference. Julian Assange is the leader of that, the mastermind, the creator, and really, because he thinks of it as a journalistic enterprise, the editor-in-chief.
But every story starts with a source, and Assange has some unconventional sources.
Julian Assange does not hack as far as we know. He is the recipient of people who are either insiders who give him secret documents or hack emails from a foreign power.
That's Eli Lake.
I am a columnist for Bloomberg.
And there was no source bigger for Assange than Chelsea Manning. He used to be known as U.S. soldier Bradley Manning. In 2010, Manning provided Assange and WikiLeaks with hundreds of thousands of leaked government documents. WikiLeaks quietly began releasing the documents in February of 2010, then made big headlines in April by posting what is now known as the collateral murder video.
Come on, fire!
It was a vivid, graphic video. It changed the debate on the Iraq War, and importantly, it put WikiLeaks on the map when they put it online, and they couldn't be ignored at that point.
And those leaks were just the beginning. They went on to post more than 90,000 leaked documents known as the Afghan war logs, 390,000 documents known as the Iraq war logs, and 250,000 private messages between diplomats called cables in what is now known as Cablegate. These leaks were met with very real ethical questions.
The problem with publishing those cables was that a number of confidential sources for U.S. diplomats who faced real danger when their names were exposed.
Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton drove the point home that
every country, including the United States, must be able to have candid conversations about the people and nations with whom they deal.
Shortly after Cablegate, the Swedish government issued an arrest warrant for Assange on allegations of rape and molestation. He claimed the allegations were fabricated to get him extradited to the United States, a claim the U.S. government denied. Either way, Assange's next move was
to seek refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, which really was the beginning of the new chapter in his life and what we're dealing with now, which is him being stuck in London.
What was supposed to be an office in an embassy is now Assange's self-imposed prison to this very day. But that doesn't mean he's slowed down. Since being trapped in the embassy, WikiLeaks has released files about Guantanamo Bay prisoners, Syrian political figures, and the draft to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then came the 2016 U.S. election.
Thousands of leaked emails showed Democratic Party officials possibly plotting against Bernie Sanders in his race against Hillary Clinton.
Over the course of 68 days, WikiLeaks released 20,000 confidential Democratic National Committee emails. In terms of the presidential race, if you look right here, when Assange released the first batch of emails, Trump actually takes his first lead against Clinton.
I think we've had enough of the Clintons, in all fairness.
Once WikiLeaks started exposing secrets of the Democratic Party, Julian Assange became a hero to many on the right. Public opinion kind of flip-flopped.
WikiLeaks!
From the emails, we now know Hillary Clinton's campaign manager makes risotto, and also how the DNC squashed Bernie Sanders' campaign. One thing we don't know is who gave Assange the stolen emails in the first place.
Many leading Democrats say they suspect it was the Russians. They released an analysis from a private cybersecurity firm that had said it was the Russians.
But Assange claims
our source is not the Russian government, and it is not a state party.
So this is where we stand today. The public still doesn't know who provided the emails to WikiLeaks. Meanwhile, Assange is still running WikiLeaks and still releasing documents. In March 2017, he started publishing documents from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence called Vault 7.
The CIA, the agency charged with finding and keeping our top secrets, can't keep its own secrets.
As long as Assange has a connection to the world, no government secret will be too far from exposure.
Julian Assange is still in the embassy. Maybe he'll leave, maybe he won't. Kind of regardless, his work has been done. He's changed the way people think about their governments, about their own secrets, about their own hackability, and really the world has changed because of him.
it debuted, the 4G wireless we have today allowed people for the first time to hit the road and explore unknown places with only a smartphone for directions. When 5G arrives, it could enable driverless cars to take us there as well. 5G stands for fifth generation mobile networks or wireless systems. It's insanely fast and can accommodate a lot more connected devices. But the reason it's being called revolutionary is because 5G will allow connected devices to speak to each other as well as people.
Right now we're living in a world where really it's a one-way experience.
That's Bloomberg tech reporter Ian King.
The network talks to your phone, you look at your phone and access data, then you send something back to the network. What we're being told about 5G is that really for the first time we're going to see machines communicating with each other over mobile networks in a meaningful way.
5G could end up being 100 times faster than what we have now, with speeds that could reach 20 gigabits per second. In plain English, that means downloading a full-length HD movie in seconds. 5G will also increase total bandwidth, which we will need in order to accommodate the growing Internet of Things. We're talking about the class of devices like internet-connected refrigerators, thermostats, dog collars, but 5G will enable many, many more.
Things like your utility network factories, where machines are just sat there not connected at all. Suddenly they're all going to be connected. Suddenly we're going to be able to have real-time monitoring. Other things like cars, like utility poles, like your light, the light poles.
But perhaps the biggest advance will be a huge reduction in communication lag time, known as latency. A network of driverless cars will need the speed of 5G to ping each other multiple times per second to avoid collisions. Near instantaneous data transfers could allow doctors to perform surgery remotely with a robotic scalpel. So how will all this work? First, you need to improve network density.
And that's just a fancy word for saying you put more towers out there. What we're being told is that's not actually the case with 5G.
The idea is 5G will not only use the existing mobile spectrum, but also tap into higher frequencies called millimeter waves. Millimeter waves can carry more data, but only travel short distances. This may mean you'll see a lot more of these base stations around town. And the new towers may have as many as 100 antenna ports, compared to about a dozen on 4G cell towers. So when will we get 5G? Getting 5G ready is expected to cost providers $275 billion over 7 years in the US alone. Look for the first 5G service to pop up in big cities sometime in 2019.
People think of Vladimir Putin, they think of capital P, power. And that's exactly the impression he creates. Whether it's physical power, firing different weapons, riding in various James Bond-esque modes of transportation, or tossing hapless opponents in judo. Or political power, ruling his own country with an iron fist, crushing his political opposition, or, most recently, being accused of meddling in foreign elections for his own benefit. This is how Vladimir Putin went from a poor, tough kid in Leningrad to a KGB spy to the very symbol of modern Russia. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was born in 1952 in Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg. His father was a factory foreman and his mother a homemaker. It is widely said that Putin's public-facing tough guy persona can be traced back to him getting into fights when he was younger, which paved the way for him to take up judo. After getting a law degree from Leningrad State University, Putin joined the KGB Foreign Intelligence Service. He spent 16 years in the KGB. When Putin returned to Russia, he began his political career.
He went to work for Anatoly Sobchak, who was then the mayor of St. Petersburg.
That's Leonid Bershidsky.
I'm a columnist at Bloomberg View.
Putin thrived in Sobchak's administration because
he was sort of considered pretty efficient city official at that time. He was very loyal to Sobchak.
So loyal and efficient that
he was noticed by Yeltsin's close circle.
And those people soon brought Putin over to Moscow to work in Yeltsin's administration, where he quickly climbed the political ladder.
Then, of course, he was promoted to Prime Minister of Russia.
That's Dmitry Trenin.
I am currently director of the Carnegie Moscow Center.
Around this time, Yeltsin and the people around him, the so-called family, decided that Putin would become Yeltsin's successor. And then this happened. The apartment bombings were carried out in 3 Russian cities, killing 293 people and injuring more than 1,000. Putin immediately accused Chechen separatists for the bombings and followed it up with action.
He was credited with having a very successful military campaign against the terrorists.
And it worked.
After that, he became an heir apparent in the eyes of the Russian people.
3 months later, Yeltsin resigned. And on his way out, a famous exchange.
He was getting into the car in the Kremlin, and the last words that he addressed to Putin before getting into his car was, "Take good care of Russia."
So Putin took over as president, and 3 months after that, won his first election. But just because Putin won the presidency, that didn't mean he had all the power. This is Michael McFall.
I was U.S. ambassador from 2012 to 2014. In the 1990s, there was a fire sale of all the things worth owning in Russia, and certain people,
the oligarchs,
did better than others in that fire sale, sometimes called privatization, and those people tended to be well connected with the Yeltsin regime, and they weren't Putin's friends. But they probably miscalculated, thinking that they could easily find a way to influence him. It became impossible almost from the start.
From that very moment, there was warfare between him and the oligarchs.
That's when Putin gave the oligarchs a choice. Putin's way?
Some of those people from the 90s managed to figure out a new way of dealing with Putin and have survived.
Or prison.
Others could not find common vision, and so they lost their assets.
Khodorkovsky once was Russia's richest person, worth $15 billion, but he ran afoul of President Vladimir Putin and spent a decade in prison.
With domestic power consolidated, Putin focused on restoring Russia's global influence.
Putin is the guy who believes in the expansionist Russian state. Georgia and Ukraine and all the other Soviet republics that split off when the Soviet Union fell apart, he still believes that they're traditional Russian satellites. A lot of his strategy is about keeping them in the orbit. That Yeltsin line, take good care of Russia, that's how he understands it.
And he used annexation and invasion, as well as oil, gas, and trade to keep former Soviet republics in Russia's orbit. In 2008, Putin's 2 terms were up, and he decided to step down as president. Dmitry Medvedev stepped in as president, and Putin went back to prime minister. But really,
Putin never left power. He pretty much continued running the country, and Medvedev was a bit of a figurehead.
There was actually a period of cooperation between Russia and the U.S. that benefited both countries during Medvedev's presidency.
Because Medvedev did not have the same negative attitude towards the West as Putin did.
But when Putin came back to run for a 3rd term, in the lead up to the 2012 election, it was widely believed that both the presidential and parliamentary elections were rigged, and Russians took to the streets. Putin blamed the protests squarely on America, and more specifically, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
He believed that she had sent, and this is his words, a signal to demonstrators.
Still, Putin won by a huge margin and set about crushing the protest movement immediately upon his return to the Kremlin. Over the next few years, Russia's economy tumbled. Putin annexed Crimea, leading to sanctions. The price of oil fell drastically. The ruble hit a new low, and America played down Russia's influence, with Obama calling Russia a regional power. Despite all of that, Putin's approval rating remained sky high, and then an opportunity for payback.
I think I'd get along very well with Vladimir Putin.
In 2016, there was one candidate who called Vladimir Putin very smart.
Trump exhibited tolerance towards Putin's actions annexing Crimea, and similar views on NATO and sanctions.
Secretary Clinton didn't support any of those views.
Even though Putin denies any wrongdoing,
U.S. elections.
Yes.
the U.S. has accused Russia of being behind the leaking of 20,000 Democratic National Committee emails, which many say helped Trump beat Hillary Clinton in the presidential election. Which leaves us here, with the possibility of a President Putin until 2024, positioning Russia to be the world power he always imagined it should be.
Jack Ma is Asia's richest man and most recognizable business tycoon. He's the chairman of Alibaba, China's e-commerce giant and one of the 10 largest companies in the world. Yet he still wants more.
We know where we're going. We want to be the 5th largest economy.
Big words from the man some call Asia's Jeff Bezos. He's confident, he's charismatic, and he's definitely not the average CEO. This is how a poor school teacher went from the classroom to being one of the most influential multi-billionaires in the world. Ma was born in China's southeastern city Hangzhou in 1964. His parents were traditional musician storytellers. As a teenager, he started to learn English from foreign tourists after China opened up in the late 1970s.
And then for 9 years, Jack Ma hung around outside the Hangzhou Hotel, which is now called the Shangri-La. He would get up at 5 a.m. to talk to travelers.
That's Bloomberg technology reporter Lulu Chen.
And I cover China Internet for Bloomberg.
Ma failed China's National University entrance exam twice before being admitted to local teachers' college. He graduated in 1988. He applied for 30 jobs and got rejected, including from the fast food giant KFC.
When KFC came to China, come to us say, 24 people went for the job. 73 people accepted. I was the only one guy.
Then Ma got a job at a local university and taught English there for about 5 years, earning just $15 a month. On the side, he started a translation company with several friends. During a company trip to the US in 1995, Ma had his first encounter with the internet at a friend's place in Seattle.
I searched the first word, beer. I don't know why, because it's easy to spell, baby. And I see beers from Germany, beers from USA, beers from Japan, but there's no beer from China.
So he searched for the word China instead and still couldn't find anything. And that got him thinking. He wanted to build something that would put China on the world's map.
He started China Pages, a Yellow Pages-like website, but it didn't take off. Then Ma joined a government agency in Beijing to help set up a website. By 1999, the internet stock boom had gripped Wall Street, and back in his Hangzhou apartment, Ma decided to try again. With his wife and a group of friends, Ma raised $80,000 and set up Alibaba, a site that allowed businesses to sell stuff to each other.
人家美国人强就强它的硬件，强就强它的系统建设，这方面确实比你早。但是玩信息玩软的，中国人的脑袋绝不比你们差。我们在座的所有人的脑袋绝不比你们差。
By 2000, Alibaba had raised $25 million from investors, including Goldman Sachs and SoftBank.
He had no business plan and zero revenue, but his eyes was very strong eyes.
In 2003, Alibaba started Taobao, a platform for individual sellers to trade with each other, and publicly declared war against eBay, who had started to make a foray into China.
Jack Ma has this famous saying that Alibaba is a crocodile in the Yangtze River, whereas eBay is a shark in the ocean. And if they fight eBay in the ocean, then they'll lose. But if they fight them in the Yangtze River, then they have a home base advantage.
In 2007, just 1 year after it forced eBay out of China, Alibaba debuted its business-facing division on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, but it delisted 5 years later as its performance sagged. But in 2014, Alibaba raised $25 billion in the world's biggest IPO in New York.
Everybody should have a dream. What if that dream comes true?
After achieving dominance in the business of e-commerce in China, Alibaba has been building an internet empire worth $472 billion, with businesses in cloud computing, online video streaming, movie production, healthcare, sports, retail, and even news media.
Alibaba buying into South China Morning Post really raised eyebrows. This is the largest English newspaper in Hong Kong, and it shows that Jack Ma's ambitions weren't limited to e-commerce. He wanted to influence not just Chinese users, but also overseas users as well.
The US has criticized Alibaba for allowing companies to sell counterfeit and poorly made goods, but in China, it enjoys the favor of China's government. It's part of Ma's company philosophy.
In love with the government, but don't marry with them.
Jack Ma's an extremely fortunate man for jumping on the internet sector so early. Note that this is a person who has no coding skills at all. He's a natural showman and a gifted public speaker and really able to convince others to believe in his vision.
Ma's vision of growing Alibaba to be the world's 5th largest economy faces strong competition at home and abroad. It will require more than just naked ambition and charisma, but Ma is great at getting himself in the right place at the right time. So far, it's served him well.
By the way, it's a disease, without question, has more names than any disease in history. I can name Kung Flu, 18 different versions of names. Call it a virus, which it is. Many call it a flu, whatever it is.
Peter Thiel is a walking contradiction. He got his bachelor's and Juris Doctorate from Stanford, but speaks out about the horrors of higher education, saying college is
as corrupt as the Catholic Church was 500 years ago.
He's a staunch supporter of the free press, yet he bankrolled a lawsuit to bankrupt an independent media company.
But these were not journalists.
And most of all, he's an immigrant libertarian who's the most public supporter of Donald Trump in all of Silicon Valley.
What Trump represents isn't crazy, and it's not going away.
This is the story of how an openly gay, immigrant genius, libertarian billionaire went from tech contrarian to Silicon Valley's biggest Trump supporter. Peter Thiel was born on October 11, 1967 in Frankfurt, West Germany, to Suzanne and Klaus Thiel. Peter's family emigrated to Cleveland, Ohio when he was 1. An Ayn Rand devotee during his youth, Thiel attended Stanford University majoring in philosophy.
His Stanford experience shaped a really big part of who he decided to surround himself with.
That's Lizette Chapman.
And I cover technology and venture capital here at Bloomberg.
He and his Stanford friends made their first big splash in tech with PayPal. After selling to eBay for $1.5 billion, they would become known as the PayPal Mafia for each incredible...
Okay, traders, I'm placing a new order for euro. I'm looking to buy at 118, 26.3. Okay, I'm looking to buy at 118, 26.3. Right here. I placed an order, so if you're looking to trade euro, is your chance. You can buy euro and you can make a good trade based on our strategy. Okay? Stay safe.
People to search that information for patterns. Data like
financial information, feeds from video cameras, biometric details, passport information, flight manifest.
Palantir doesn't talk much about how they collect this data, who has access to it, or what they do with it. But they have contracts with
the Department of Homeland Security and the CIA and the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission.
And several other federal agencies. It's the richest company you've never heard of, valued at $20 billion. But there are plenty of obscenely wealthy people in Silicon Valley. What makes him different...
He's a complex ball of multiple contradictions.
Take college, for example. Even though college was extremely important for Thiel, there's something called the Thiel Fellowship.
In exchange for dropping out and a promise not to pursue college, Thiel would give them $100,000 each.
You basically tell people that if you get a diploma, you're saved. Otherwise you go to hell. You go to Yale or you go to jail.
Also, his relationship with the press.
Here's another contradiction. He's donated to free press initiatives, including the Committee to Protect Journalists.
But he also secretly spent tens of millions of dollars bankrolling a lawsuit filed by Hulk Hogan over the publication of a sex tape and bankrupting the independently run Gawker Media.
Okay, guys, position opened on euro at 118.26.3. Just right here. Okay, you are in trade. Well done. Let's see how far it will go and how much profit we'll make from it.
That came with it for many of his colleagues in Silicon Valley. He didn't want more of the establishment.
No matter how crazy this election seems, it is less crazy than the condition of our country.
After briefly supporting Carly Fiorina in the primaries, Thiel pivoted to Trump, donating $1.25 million to Trump and his associated super PACs in October 2016. And he didn't just help Trump financially. He gave a full-throated keynote speech supporting Trump at the Republican National Convention.
I'm not a politician, but neither is Donald Trump. He is a builder, and it's time to rebuild America.
And when Trump was finally elected, Thiel was given the reins to an enormous amount of power.
And I want to thank you, man. You have a very special guy.
He was named the transitional advisor. And in that role, he did a lot of interviewing and a lot of vetting to fill hundreds of cabinet positions and different jobs within the administration.
But it turns out, Thiel's support isn't unconditional.
Talking to people who spend time with him, I have also heard that he is no longer a great supporter of Trump.
It was reported that Thiel was unhappy with the direction of Trump's presidency. Ever since, he's been mum, making no public appearances, no statements, and staying out of the spotlight altogether. Although there have been suggestions that Trump could tap Thiel for a top intelligence post or ambassadorship, there's no indication he'd accept.
He's described his relationship with politics as schizophrenic. He gets really involved, and then he runs away as fast as possible.
Whether Thiel takes a new position or simply continues as a board director at Facebook and Palantir, at just 50 years old, he's primed to wield some serious influence in technology and politics for decades to come.
2016 was again the hottest year on record, and the previous 17 years have seen our 16 most scorching. Scientists overwhelmingly agree. Global warming is the culprit. And it's just getting started. Ice caps, extreme weather, wildfires, droughts, and the hits keep coming. What are we doing about it? In 2015, the world took its boldest step yet to stem climate change with a historic accord in Paris. But now comes the hard part. Nations must change energy policies and invest huge amounts of money, and they will likely do it without the United States. President Donald Trump announced on June 1st that the U.S. would withdraw from the accord.
The reality is that withdrawing is in America's economic interest and won't matter much to the climate.
Here's the situation. Decades in the making, the Paris Agreement united the U.S., China, and more than 190 other nations in a push to limit fossil fuel pollution. The UN-sponsored plan secured pledges to cut greenhouse gases, the emissions that trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere, in an effort to avoid the rising seas and other environmental disasters that climate models predict. But even if all pledges are met, the globe is expected to warm by as much as 3.4 degrees Celsius this century, more than the UN target of well below 2 degrees. Meeting the Paris Agreement means that governments will have to offer more incentives for clean energy, scale back support for fossil fuels, make emissions more costly, and reduce deforestation. It's estimated that the deal will require $13.5 trillion of spending through 2030. Here's the argument. Unlike past climate pacts such as the Kyoto Protocol, each country set its own Paris targets and then promised to revisit and improve them. The U.S. was primed to play a lead role in climate change, but Trump's Energy Independence Executive Order reverses Obama-era rules and directives put in place to combat climate change, and expands production of coal, the dirtiest fossil fuel. The resulting policies threaten the global fight against climate change. Without the U.S. commitment to emissions reduction, other countries may join it in abandoning the Paris Agreement. This could make it almost impossible and even more expensive down the line to stop climate change. Optimists argue that the shift to a lower carbon future is already underway. Businesses, cities, and U.S. states, such as California, are already investing in wind and solar and taking other steps to make it work.
I've actually been called an environmentalist, if you can believe that.
There's an inherent attraction to light and being human. And I think on a very deep psychological level, light is this way in which we experience the energy surrounding us in a very personal manner. My name is Matt Dilling. I'm the founder of Light Bright Neon Studio, and we manufacture, produce, and restore neon works of art and design. Origins of the creative content of a lot of the work at Light Bright comes from a variety of sources. Sometimes people come with a napkin sketch, some people come with an Adobe Illustrator file, and we have a whole design team who then we kind of work together to help create layouts of what it might look like. Scale it up and create a paper template using a pen plotter. And that paper template actually becomes our guide for what we're going to bend the neon to. We take from the office into the glass shop. We pick out the right size tubing with the right color for the right size project. From there, we heat up the glass tubing. The torches heat the glass well in excess of 1,000 degrees in order for it to get into its molten state. We heat up and bend the glass tubing to match the template. One of our chandeliers has over 100 different bends in it. So each one of those bends has to be marked for a heated up bend. We also have to allow the glass to cool between the bends so that the next area can be worked on and heated up in its own unique fashion. It turns into spaghetti, and then we have to make sure that that spaghetti lines back up and cools to the template. We use a blow hose to connect our mouth to the tube, create a volume that's closed, and we can control the pressure in there with our mouth. There's just a variety of challenges that come up inherently in working with glass. Glass can crack due to stress, and sometimes you'll just have a batch that all it wants to do when it gets near a torch is crack. After we've bent various components, we have to go in using the crossfire or the hand torch and actually weld all of those pieces together. The last step on that is then to weld on electrodes onto either end. Each one of those steps is very, very specific. I draw inspiration from so many different experiences. It's hard to come up with one thing that's particular, but one of the ways that I really am able to connect with the creative is to float. Floating is a similar experience to meditation, to psychedelics. Going into a blackened room and laying out in a body of water and salt that's heated to your body temperature, and it allows for all sort of external stimulation to fall away. And your internal world really begins to bubble up and manifest. You really get to experience a different relationship to your mind. I work with neon because I can't not work with it. It's so challenging and so rewarding. And those things are so intertwined that there's no way of separating it out. I learn so much and continue to learn so much by working with it. I find so much inspiration in working with it, and I just continue to experience new and different things through the medium. It's that close to me at this point. Once the neon tube is completed, we have to hook it up to our manifold for bombarding. The manifold is opened, a vacuum is drawn. We check the tube for leaks with our Tesla coil. We close the tube back off, and we heat it up using a very large and powerful transformer. As the tube is heated up, it releases anything that's not inert inside the tube, and we evacuate that out. We introduce the gas into it. and we seal the tube off, sealing into that tube whatever gas we introduced into it. I think my favorite part of making a neon light is when I see it lit up for the first time. Different gases, when electrified, emit different wavelengths of light. Neon gas is this very bright orange, fiery red color. Argon gas creates a very intense blue, but that light output that is produced can then be expressed in a different wavelength by coating the inside of the tubes with a phosphor coating that takes that one wavelength of light and emits a different wavelengths. We bring it over to the aging table where we hook it up to an age-in transformer and allow it to settle, age the gas in that we've introduced to it. There's always a stray particle of something left inside the tube. But that time that the oxide coating can act to scrub whatever is left inside the tube while things are getting settled into place. Once the tubes are aged in, we move on to our process of assembling two halves of the fixture together in a jig, gluing up the center of the fixture to its spindle. Once the adhesive dried, we would connect the wires from the fixture together into a transformer, and we turn on power and it lights up. Part of what we love about what we do here is that we try and put out into the world the kind of things that we'd like to see. I still am surprised when it lights up. I'm still excited when I get to see it illuminated. There's an ineffable quality to it. To me, is this insight into the inner workings of the universe. It literally is. It's a way of looking at what is surrounding us in the cosmos in a new light.
a bit like an addiction. You've got to make something. You have to do something. It's borderline obsession. And every bike we build is my favourite bike at the time, and as soon as it's done, I want to build another one. Sven cycles is something I've been thinking about ever since I started cycling in my late teens. We want bikes that ultimately you'll really enjoy riding. There's never a bike that's the same. There's always a slight change. And as we build them individually as well, they have the marks of a bike that's built by hand. Most people I know cycle have an idea of their dream bicycle. And it may be an evolving idea you've had in your head. And we've worked with a lot of people that have come to us with sketches and scrapbooks. It's really, really nice to build something that's just one-off and unique. I think a lot of people see a bicycle as two wheels and a frame in the middle. There are a lot of subtle changes and nuances in design which can change the riding characteristics quite dramatically. I'm a really big fan of modernist architecture, and the simplicity of a modernist building is really hard to achieve. And with some of our bikes, they may look very simple, but I think people should not underestimate the time and effort that goes into designing a product. Tubing is key to a bike's feel and ride. Reynolds tubing has been in my life ever since I can remember. Growing up, I could never afford a frame manufactured with their tubing. We can now put a badge on our bike saying manufactured at Reynolds, which is a sort of thing as a kid I just wouldn't have believed was going to happen. Every part of the bike has a specific tube. It's not universal. The first thing we do is get the tubes out, check they're correct, check the wall thicknesses, sand the edges, make sure it's all really clean, because if it's not clean, the tubes won't join together correctly. We build in steel because I still believe it's one of the best materials to use. It's been used in bikes since the late 1800s, and they're still using it now for a very good reason. It's the flexibility that we can replace the tube, repaint the bike, and you wouldn't know it's damaged. I just like working with it. It's very sculptural. This isn't sort of aerospace precision engineering. It's a steel rule and a marker. So when we're cutting the tubes, it's within a mil or two. But what we're trying to do is take the best from bicycle building in the past and add a little bit of modern flair to it. There's various techniques for building bicycles. We do a thing called fillet brazing, where you connect a pipe together. We use a bronze rod and a flame. We heat the tubes up to the same temperature and we fill the joint with bronze. And it gives a very, very sort of fluid, lovely, sort of quite sculptural feel. You've got to practice. You've got to be able to judge material temperatures. You've got to just look at it and you just get a feel for it. It's a stage where your tubes start to look a bit like a bicycle. My father's a jeweller. He'd make sort of very pretty things, which are lovely, but for me, they don't really have any function. What I love about bicycles, you can start on a Monday with a box of tubes. You can be riding it by the weekend, and it can last you for the rest of your life. Outside of the frame and forks, the other most important part is the wheels and tyres. When you build the wheels, you have to lace them, so there's little holes going all the way around the rim. You poke the spoke through. We do build all our wheels by hand here because a machine can't get 30 years worth of wheel building experience. Colour is very, very personal. With any of our bikes, you can have them painted whatever colour you want. We've matched one to a teapot, so we can get that scanned and we can match that, or someone's favourite item of clothing. I like to let the bike sit for 4 or 5 days minimum, just so the paint can have time to cure a little bit, and then we assemble it. We get out all the new components, and it's a case of putting them together. Some bikes you can assemble in 3 hours, some will take 3 days. And we've built bikes that cost in the £10,000 plus mark. Some people, they're saving up and this is their bike and they're going to own it for the rest of their lives. So we just want to make sure they get the right thing. I think the bike for me was the first time I had some freedom. So as soon as I had one, I was off. lot of people still get that thrill as when they were a kid blasting down a hill, wind going through their hair. It's fun. Everyone has their favourite jacket or something that just makes them feel good. If you've got a bike that fits well, you actually feel part of it. Building bicycles as a creative outlet is fantastic. It's not something you do because you're going to get a big paycheck at the end.
Okay, guys, I'm placing a stop on profit for euro. We reached the necessary level. Broker increased spread, so we had to wait. And right now I can place a stop on profit at 118.28.3. So anybody who trying to complain to saying broker is not fair to us, it's broker is not fair to us too. This is their job. And they're acting as the middleman, so you have to accept everything. So in order to remove all this hassle with brokers, I suggest you to get the strategy that always works, that you don't have to worry about if broker will increase spread or if broker will do something that will not allow you to close your trade. In this case, our strategy designed to work in this kind of environment. So as you can see, we was waiting until broker increased. In our case, broker increased spread to 6 pips. I couldn't place a stop on profit until the price reached a level above my stop on profit on 6 pips. So the price should reach at the level 118.34.3. Okay, so we trade with quite large amount of account and large amount of money involved in our trades, but brokers, we're still using brokers as a middleman because it's more profitable for us. And as you can see, we're already in profit and we place stop on profit. We was waiting until we'll be able to place stop on profit, and this is what we did. So if you follow our trade, please do so. Please place stop on profit, that you will not lose your trade. Okay, guys, well done. Good trade. Yeah.
If you ever saw a wooden surfboard, it was probably hanging in somebody's house or underneath the deck. But kind of in the last 10 or 15 years, wood has made a big comeback. They surf wonderfully. It's beautiful and it feels great to be on one of them. I always had a love for wood and kind of passionate about things that went in the water. I've kind of been around wooden boats most of my life. There's just so much character. The way they're built, the stories that come with them, a lot of that has translated over to why we build surfboards the way we do. When we first started thinking about building surfboards, wood was the natural material we chose. They have a very high strength to weight ratio. Wooden surfboards have the longest history of use in the surf world than any other material. People have been surfing wooden surfboards since kind of the first documented history of people riding waves. The board starts in CAD, where we take a 3D model, break down the shape, and kind of create frames and templates and all the inner parts of the board that we get cut on a CNC machine. We take those frames and we just pop them out, assemble the frame into kind of a skeleton. We go out to our lumber shed, pick a bunch of cedar, and bring them into our mill shop, put glue along the edges, clamp it all together into a panel. Everything's book matched. You have symmetry in the colors and texture of the wood. Cut your outline. Take our assembled frame, gently put it down right on top of the plank. Once that foundation is started, you're basically building up the three-dimensional shape, the outside part of the board, using lots of strips that kind of interlock and fit together. Every piece of wood is going to be different, and it's all going to react differently. There are frustrations with it, but I think that's one of the things that keeps it challenging. You learn to read the kind of what the grain lines are doing and what the color of the wood is telling you. Once those rails are cleaned up, we put our top planks on. It's a little bit like putting a lid on a box. It's like, this is it. Whatever's inside that board is staying inside that board. And by tensioning some rope, you can clamp the two together. It's like a time capsule. What makes our boards unique are they are built right here in York. They're built using material that grows right here in the state of Maine. They're built 100% by hand by local craftspeople and surfers. There's a lot of time that goes into these boards, between 40 and 60 hours start to finish. We wanted to build surfboards that were as hollow as they could be, but still be strong enough to work well. Too light and they don't surf well, but too heavy and they don't surf well. So there's a balance point there, and that's where we try to be. Taking the board off the rocker table, once the top has gone on, that is by far one of my top favorite parts. It's just you and a shaping stand, a board, and a hand plane. Everything else is out of your view. It's simple, it's pleasurable, it's quiet. You can be with your thoughts and you can just kind of be present. There's something about taking a nice sharp edge tool to a beautiful piece of wood and feeling the curls coming off and knowing that every pass that you're making, you're kind of getting it closer and closer to what you have in mind. Once we've shaped it down and the board's looking like it's supposed to look like, time for it to go into the glassing room. 4-ounce fiberglass, laying it over the board, draping it over the edges, cutting it, applying epoxy, and on the board. Once both sides are lamb coated, it's time to put in the hardware. Drill and router and install the fin box. And on the other side, we drill and put in the leash plug and a vent. There's a lot of air just naturally inside the board, and that air wants to expand and contract with temperature changes. And that vent has a little piece of Gore-Tex fabric in it, and it allows air to kind of breathe both ways, but it doesn't allow water to get in. Once all that hardware is put in, it goes back into the glassing room. We brush a nice, beautiful, thick coat of epoxy over the whole surface, and that we call a gloss coat. That's supposed to look beautiful and glossy and shiny and flawless. You get to see that board come to life. Whatever the colors in the wood, they really come out. It just makes it look like candy. You just want to touch it and run your hands down it, and it's just kind of the icing on the cake. Once everything is hard, we put it into what we call the oven, get that epoxy to cure, really kind of bake it, and just get it to harden. Put in the fin, screw in the vent, and ship it out. We just love the idea of building something that's sustainable and long-lasting and made by hand. Kind of gives you a deeper connection to the product over something you might buy on a shelf. When a customer gets the board, they feel it. They 100% feel the amount of work and the amount of passion that went into the board. So I'm not really looking at hours and efficiency. We're looking at like doing it right and enjoying it as we go.
Ma Baoli, better known as Gang La, is one of the 4 Grand Marshals leading New York's Pride Parade this year. But in the country he comes from, being gay is still a...
Another profit on euro at 118.28.3. We collected 2 pips, and in our case, we collected £200. If you would like to get strategy, the strategy is available on our website. By the way, you can check, I'm going to run 15 minutes free one-on-one coaching session. So anybody who wants to register, a lot of people right now interested and registered. So we still have spaces available, slots available for you. It's free, you don't have to pay anything at all. I'll explain maybe one-on-one more precisely. Maybe I will try to answer some questions exactly what the strategy is about, what you can trade, how it trade, because different people, you got different questions. So you're welcome to register. The all information you can find on our streamer, as you can see on YouTube, on description, or on, what do you call it, chat box, right? Okay, stay safe.
互联网上所有的信息都是负面的，都是错的，就是说同性恋要电击疗法，要被治疗，然后要吃药等等。
After visiting some foreign websites with different attitudes to homosexuality, Ma created his own site for a Chinese audience, encouraging people that
他们也是正常的，他们不用自卑，然后也不用自杀。
Even though attitudes towards homosexuals are slowly changing in China, it's still a social stigma. The virtual world of Blood, where members can be open about their sexuality, is for most a striking contrast to their real lives. This is live streaming, a function added to Blood in late 2015, right as the internet craze was starting to take off in China. Many self-made stars like Jin make decent amounts of money by receiving audiences' virtual currencies and gifts.
我们不是彼此的初恋，初恋这种事儿多不靠谱啊。
For Kyle and Klaus, a couple who have come out, live streaming on Blood means something different.
其实我经常会收到很多粉丝的一些互动的留言，就是类似，就是说你们让我们看到了同志情侣之间的一些希望啊。我看到这样的留言，我是很欣慰。
The government's rules for acceptable content online may shift quickly in China, with LGBT material in a grey area. Many companies feel the chill of the recent internet crackdown, but Blue City still runs as usual. Ma has won the Chinese government's trust by helping with HIV prevention among gay men. A third of the company's staff are dedicated to screening pornographic and politically sensitive content.
我不太多的愿意去对抗，我更多的愿意去对话。 去改变他们的想法，我觉得这个可能在中国来说是更有效的。
In the past 5 years, Blue City has grown from a team of 7 people to a promising business with about 250 staff. Ma said the company earned over $15 million last year, mainly through advertising and selling virtual currencies to live streaming audiences. Now the company is expanding overseas.
我希望吧，通过我们的努力，布鲁蒂能够成为全球第一家在美国纳斯达克或者是纽交所上市的这样的同质互联网公司。
This is Rich Chiga. He's a Chinese rapper by way of Indonesia, and he's very popular on the internet. This is Joji. He's a Japanese-Australian singer, and he's also very popular on the internet. Plus, Joji invented the Harlem Shake meme. Let me say that again. This guy, Joji, in the blood bathtub, invented the Harlem Shake meme. But we'll come back to that. So Rich and Joji are both signed to 88 Rising, an entertainment company hoping to build a lasting global brand that will outlive singular moments of virality. They primarily create content combining Asian culture and hip-hop, a formula that apparently pleases the internet gods greatly. They've only been around for 18 months, but they're already putting up major label numbers.
I think that we have an unprecedented collective of talent, a group of predominantly Asian artists, really making waves globally, which from an independent point of view as well.
88's founder, Sean Miyashiro, cut his teeth launching Vice's electronic music channel, Thump. But quickly, Sean became interested in life beyond dance music.
I knew that after launching a whole content platform that I have kind of the ability and the know-how to do it again, but for what was the question?
So Sean moved to the Bronx to start over and figure it out. He couldn't afford an office space, so he worked out of his car at the top of a grimy parking garage.
Everything kind of started here. If you look around, this is my environment. This is my serenity, really. 88 Rising was built here. Built on the grounds of LA Fitness residence in a parking garage. I was living in the Bronx. I'm just damn, where the hell do I go? So I just come up here and I I just kind of figure things out every single day. Being okay, what the hell is this thing? Coming here was kind of my own kind of private office, basically. To be honest, I would even go to the bathroom here. I would take pisses here, you know what I mean? It was, it's just too far to go back down there. When I need Wi-Fi, I'd spend a good part of the day at Dunkin' Donuts. Hi, how are you? Can I get a chicken snack wrap?
Before 88 Rising officially launched, Sean caught a surprise break in the form of a Twitter friendship with a funny 16-year-old kid from Indonesia named Brian, who taught himself English by watching Rubik's Cube tutorial videos on YouTube. Seriously, that's true.
I thought his Twitter was genius, from the future, just crazy, and just the shit that he was saying, the memes he was making. But I didn't know that he rapped or anything like that. I really didn't, and he came up with that stick 2 weeks later.
12 in the morning, pop shells for a living, and baby gon' smell blood trail every minute, bro.
Dat Stick was Brian's first ever attempt at making a rap song, and it immediately went viral.
Everything was great about it, but the one thing that I noticed is the song was hard as hell. Just everything about it, man. Just it was menacing, bro.
Soon after the video dropped, Brian signed with 88 Rising.
I'll FaceTime with Rich. Sorry for calling you Rich Chiga on my phone, Rich. Brian, he gets super pissed off that he's saved in my phone as Rich Chiga. He's dude, am I not a human to you? What's good, bro?
What's good, brother?
How you doing?
Doing great. I did the sound check.
How was it?
It was tight.
So, Brian could definitely rap, but some viewers understandably took offense at a Chinese kid satirizing rap cliches and calling himself Rich Chiga. But if a group of well-known rappers saw the video and genuinely liked it, that could at least help validate Brian as a legit hip-hop artist. Plus, it could be really funny.
It was just kind of an idea that I just had on the spot. Everything that rappers say is better and funnier and smarter and wittier. It's just more entertaining. We just edit it as tight as possible, put it up, and it really worked.
Yo,
this nigga got a pouch on and a Reebok pouch. This is the hardest nigga of all time.
You said when you come for a chigga like me, that was dope.
It's just lit, and I think people will take it as a joke at first, but it's like if he ran with that and kept doing more videos like that, it's just lit.
You know, I'd never been to America before, and like all of a sudden, just like I see like all the rappers that I listen to just like reacting to my stuff, and I was like, what? How did this happen?
The reaction video also went viral and even led to a remix of Dat Stick featuring Wu-Tang's Ghostface.
I'll get on that track. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Really, on the remix?
Yeah. Oh, you know him?
And yeah, the remix went viral too. Brian has since acknowledged the misstep in his name and claims he may change it. But for the time being, he's still Rich Chigga to his fans. An ever-growing global audience, hungry for more releases from emerging talent around the world.
I didn't know that it was gonna be this impactful and this important to people, and I'm very thankful and blessed that it has. And every day now that I wake up, it's like it's just like a new mission every day.
A major part of that mission involves Joji. Remember the bloody bath guy? He's a former YouTube personality in the middle of a career transition.
The sound of this song, Will He, it's like a trap song that you can like slow dance to. Awkward prom shit, you know what I mean? I used to do crazy episodic internet videos. It was going well. And one day, it was me and a few friends just in a room. We were casually chilling, and then someone plays the song, and it's brand new at the time. I happened to have a lot of costumes laying around, so I told the other guys, I was like, get in these costumes and let's just dance to it, like who cares? We were like, okay, let's just go crazy at the drop. So that video goes up, I go to sleep, and the next morning, everyone's doing it, like next morning. That taught me a lot about the internet, how people want to just be a part of something. And from that point on, something changed, and I was a little better at understanding demographics and people and what they want to see and what they want to hear. I was friends with a couple other artists who were affiliated with 88, and then I also started to realize that 88 is the bridge between Western and Asian entertainment, and I really wanted to be a part of that.
Joji just released the In Tongues EP, his first project as a serious artist.
Joji's In Tongues record came out a couple weeks ago. It's #2 on Billboard on the R&B charts, which is crazy for, independent release, and he's like a brand new artist.
And the success is even more impressive, knowing he went from creating something like this.
It's just Taco Bell. What could possibly go wrong?
To creating something Tonight, Rich Chigga has a show in New York City. Tickets sold out in an hour.
I came here, I'm first online. I was here at 1.
Yeah,
I was the third person online.
So why'd you get here so early?
Because I want to see Rich Chigga. I want to touch him.
What do you guys think of Joji?
Oh my God!
That's my dad, son. You guys cop the new EP or like?
Yeah.
I woke up at 6 in the morning just to cop that shit. And then I listened to it, and that shit started making me cry.
This is actually kind of exciting. Every time, this never gets old. Like, you live online and social media, but like, there's nothing like just being with the people.
More often than not, viral success happens by accident. And then after an appearance on Ellen or Jimmy Kimmel, the creator's star power fizzles out. But Idiot Rising has figured out how to turn potential gimmicks into brands with an actual following that keeps coming back for the next thing.
Oh, shit!
So keep an eye out for Idiot's next move. But more than likely, it won't be covered on network television or terrestrial radio. Although, as they've already proven, nowadays that really doesn't matter.
Online retailer Farfetch is betting it can shape the future. This is its concept store, showcasing the latest in retail tech.
How do you capture all of that fantastic information that you gather in store with customers, touch and feel products? And we created a concept called the connected rail. And this is using a combination of RFID and ultrasound. The RFID signal recognizes the product, and the ultrasound recognizes the movement. Take the product off, and then you'll start to see your products appear. And essentially, it's like online browsing behavior. Whichever products you touch and pick up in the store are automatically sent to your app. This is effectively what you've created is your in-store wish list. In the middle, you'll see essentially a hologram of the product. What the customer sees, they control the experience on a touch device. What this allows the customer to do is take elements of products and then add their own style to it. Right, so this is the connected mirror. So in this example, I see my products. I select a coat, and that's tried it, and it's slightly too big for me. So what I can do is choose an alternative size and send a request to the sales associate, and they'll bring that size to me in the fitting room mirror. You'll also see that we've got some product recommendations here. Crucially, the sales associate's able to push items into the mirror from their device. If you wanted to, you could simply use the mirror and pay and go. Your items would then be packed and dispatched to you afterwards.
Do you want me to turn you so you're looking outwards? Yes, please. How about there? First time we came out with B, Jade said it feels like I've been released from prison. Do you want these, Mrs?
Definitely.
Definitely. Right. Yeah. And she could say hello to everybody, people she hadn't seen for months.
It's
Jade.
Jade.
It's Jade.
Oh. So you can talk to Jade through this.
Hi, Katie. She's there.
Hi.
Every time anyone's seen her, they want to know why she's there. And it's kind of the opposite of when you're in a wheelchair and people see you and they kind of go, oh, should I look? I don't know what the right protocol is. When there's a tiny robot with its bright little eyes going around just looking happy everywhere, it really opens you up for conversation.
You've got some friends here, look.
Hiya. When I saw her for the first time, I remember thinking, this is going to change things. This is one of those points where if this was a book, this would be the cliffhanger. have a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which means that I have a lot of dislocations, there's a lot of pain, and a lot of seizures and whatnot. So I can end up on my own in my room for long periods of time.
Yeah, my love.
A lot of the time, with a condition like my own, of course there's the pain, and the pain is bad, and the dislocations are bad, and the seizures and being in paralysis and never knowing whether you're going to be able to wake up properly tomorrow, that's bad. But what's worse still is being able to count the number of people you see a day on one hand.
Are you ready?
Sure am, I'm just hoping the connection's going to stay.
Yeah, me too. Alright, here we go.
When you're used to just the same little metre by metre and a half window every day, and you've been there for months, being able to just see the sky from somewhere else, or the tops of trees, or a sign, is incredible. Or being able to have that kind of chat in the car that most people would probably take for granted.
I'm going to go past Grandma and Grandad so you can give them a wave. Now, if Jade is particularly seizure-y, she can still take part. And that's brilliant, really, because before she would just be left in a bed or in a house with just her carers. It's quite a small world, that.
Right, so there's one of her. Here, this costume I'm busy making at the moment. When I'm not on bed rest and I'm not just wearing pyjamas all the time, I enjoy being able to dress as different characters and go to Comic Cons and that kind of thing, because it just lets me show a different side of myself, and it's a bit of fun. If you can't go out that often, you've got to enjoy it when you do.
Was that? It's good.
It's one of those weird things where I want to not have to use B because I want to be well enough to be able to go to those places myself. Like, it really makes a big difference to me to be able to go into school. But the thing is, with my condition fluctuating all of the time, I can't go into school reliably. I've been in school via B, and so far it's interesting. Still a few little things that we need to work out, but for the most part I think it's going fairly well, and it's brilliant because I can really tell the difference between today and yesterday. How yesterday I forced myself to go into school when I wasn't very well, and I was really tired afterwards and ended up having loads of seizures, whereas today I've been able to do all of the work. I've been able to keep a clear head and not be ill, which means I'm able to be more focused on my schoolwork.
So there is my first step of working, is to simplify root 8. The algebra test is next week.
Now I'm trying to make friendships which I'll be able to maintain with B. Before that, I end up letting people down quite often. B gives me hope, yeah. She's just always there, and if I can't do something, she can. And if I need sort of assistance to be able to make commitments, then she's there, and she means that I feel like a more valuable person because I'm more reliable.
it debuted, the 4G wireless we have today allowed people for the first time to hit the road and explore unknown places with only a smartphone for directions. When 5G arrives, it could enable driverless cars to take us there as well. 5G stands for fifth generation mobile networks or wireless systems. It's insanely fast and can accommodate a lot more connected devices. But the reason it's being called revolutionary is because 5G will allow connected devices to speak to each other as well as people.
Right now we're living in a world where really it's a one-way experience.
That's Bloomberg tech reporter Ian King.
The network talks to your phone, you look at your phone and access data, then you send something back to the network. What we're being told about 5G is that really for the first time we're going to see machines communicating with each other over mobile networks in a meaningful way.
5G could end up being 100 times faster than what we have now, with speeds that could reach 20 gigabits per second. In plain English, that means downloading a full-length HD movie in seconds. 5G will also increase total bandwidth, which we will need in order to accommodate the growing Internet of Things. We're talking about the class of devices like internet-connected refrigerators, thermostats, dog collars, but 5G will enable many, many more.
Things like your utility network, factories, where machines are just sat there, not connected at all. Suddenly they're all going to be connected. Suddenly we're going to be able to have real-time monitoring. Other things like cars, like utility poles, like your light, the light poles.
But perhaps the biggest advance will be a huge reduction in communication lag time, known as latency. A network of driverless cars will need the speed of 5G to ping each other multiple times per second to avoid collisions. Near instantaneous data transfers could allow doctors to perform surgery remotely with a robotic scalpel. So how will all this work? First, you need to improve network density.
And that's just a fancy word for saying you put more towers out there. What we're being told is that's not actually the case with 5G.
The idea is 5G will not only use the existing mobile spectrum, but also tap into higher frequencies called millimeter waves. Millimeter waves can carry more data, but only travel short distances. This may mean you'll see a lot more of these base stations around town. And the new towers may have as many as 100 antenna ports, compared to about a dozen on 4G cell towers. So when will we get 5G? Getting 5G ready is expected to cost providers $275 billion over 7 years in the US alone. Look for the first 5G service to pop up in big cities sometime in 2019.
The cubicle represents a tyranny, that it confines your imagination, your thoughts, into a small physical area. Imagine pretty much every software engineer or finance person being able to, disconnect from their desk and look at holographic monitors on a beach and doing their work from there. That's not going to be science fiction. It's the modern office place.
Silicon Valley is all about building the future. A startup called Meta thinks it's getting there first, thanks to a big bet that it's made on augmented reality.
How are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome to Meta.
Thank you.
Call it a 360-degree office where you can spatialize your thoughts as part of your workflow for education, architecture, design, engineering, etc.
People often mix up augmented reality with virtual reality. VR totally blocks your ability to see or hear the real world. AR overlays holograms onto what you already see. Meta has tried to make its version of the workspace feel familiar.
You grab the hologram instead of using a controller or a mouse, and your brain already knows how to do it. In other words, we've designed an operating system that humanity has always known how to use. So you can see this eyeball, which is, by the way, photorealistic. You can see my hand is occluding the eyeball, and now the eyeball is occluding my hand, right? You see those two circles? They get small, and then they turn into this glowing white ball, and then I can move my hand around supernaturally. I can do this with two hands and rotate the thing. I can stretch it. I can throw it back right into the shelving system, and that's all you have to learn to become a modern worker.
And to prove this, the employees at Meta have started to get rid of their computer monitors, trading them in for Meta's augmented reality headsets. Myron thinks that in less than a decade, we'll all be just wearing strips of glass that can project holograms.
In the early 80s, everybody had computers on their desktop, but no one was using them because they had a lot of work to do. So they were still using typewriters. And at some point, the CEO took all the typewriters away and everybody was forced to use their computers. So it's very exciting to see a new generation of technology, a new paradigm.
I consider us like pioneers in the holographic wild. I'm pulling up my browser with my hands and sending out emails to colleagues and just kind of really acclimating to the new environment.
Now you're putting on my computer, essentially. Our digital lives live on our phones. We have all of our pictures and notes and all these kinds of things. So, and why don't you write yourself a little sticky note? I like it. And go ahead and just take your fist right over the top of the sticky note and close your fist. And now.
Oh, what? Meta's own transition to augmented reality has run into plenty of unexpected problems. And it's still going to be a while before you'll start to see these devices in your office. But I think it's a future worth waiting for.
If we could see these holograms between us, we will have been able to share our work with one another more naturally, more efficiently, and more productively than ever before. Humanity will have evolved slightly.
This is Hatsune Miku, Japan's sensational virtual pop star. She's released over 100,000 songs in multiple languages and performed sold-out concerts around the world. Her image has appeared in games, on TV, in car races, and is even etched on the side of a Japanese space rocket.
I came for Hatsune Miku, Carlos.
She's Lady Gaga's favorite digital pop star and opened shows for her in the US 3 years ago. Tens of thousands of fans attended her exhibition and live shows near Tokyo recently.
理想のアイドルっていうと、どの曲でもミクはすごい綺麗に歌ってくれる。
他没有缺点啊，没有任何让我们感到不开心的一些新闻。
She's everything to everybody. That's probably why she's so popular.
Miku's creator Hiroyuki Ito and his Sapporo-based company have been developing the virtual diva for over 10 years.
初音ミクとは、キャラクターとしてすごく、YouTube とかで検索すると、たくさんの初音ミクが出てくるんですけども、元々の、初音ミクのその原点は歌声を合成する、ソフトウェアなんです。
Both the software and character are named Hatsune Miku, meaning the first sound of the future. Originally based on Yamaha's Vocaloid technology, Miku the software has a sound bank containing voice samples and a huge array of tools. You input the melody and lyrics, then Miku the character sings them. To date, Krypton has sold 120,000 software licenses at $200 each to fans around the world who use it to create numerous songs and share them online. Some of the fan-created songs are chosen to be part of Miku's concerts, for which they're paid a royalty fee.
元々初音ミクっていうその、存在自体がそのボトムアップって言いますか、中にはアマチュアクリエイターじゃなくて今もうすでに、プロになって活躍している方もいらっしゃるんですけども。
The company also has other revenue streams. It makes money from merchandising, licensing deals, and concert ticket sales.